There's everything else. And then there's sci-fi. If I were to give an answer to the age-old question of what's your favorite genre of fiction, I think my answer gotta be sci-fi, at least for anime. And the reason is simple. The genre is a breeding ground for, well, just about some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen in drawn form. Whether it be in the form of psychic biker gang members that cause mayhem in Neo Tokyo, or literally any of the other 6 million sci-fi works that might very well be the most influential things the medium has ever seen or will see. So I had a thought. It wasn't a very intelligent thought, but it was a thought nonetheless. Since this is my favorite genre, and I also like anime, what if I watched every single sci-fi anime to ever come out? Hence why I was gone for 4 months. But it was a 4 months well spent, because I discovered something. Something that is kept secret about this genre. That there is a borderline gluttonous amount of terrible, truly nauseating pieces of fiction buried inside of you. So, what are we waiting for? Let's dive in. In all my years of consuming anime, there has been nothing like Attack on Titan. The raw emotions that this show makes me feel, the delicately crafted and rich narrative that's not afraid to twist and turn, and eventually completely evolve. Attack on Titan is truly an achievement in storytelling, and media as a whole. But what if I told you I found something better? This is my favorite piece of media, and I know what you're thinking. How could this possibly surpass One Piece and Kagurabachi? Well, it all starts with an origin story, just like many things do. Google was created in a garage, and X-Arm was created by 3 stoners in one night. This anime was meticulously made from scratch, and it stayed there. Every mystery presented in this show is completely dwarfed by the conundrum of how they didn't abort this while it was still in the oven. The only motive I could possibly think of is that the producers worked on this so they could air it at their funeral so everyone else gets jealous that they're in the coffin. If this was released in 1912, the Titanic wouldn't have been the biggest disaster of that year. Jeffrey Dahmer couldn't have fathomed a method of torture more cruel and unusual than X-Arm. I never thought there'd be a piece of media that convinced me that being blind is a privilege. Okay, now that all that is on my system, I do think this anime is extremely important, and honestly, what are the most significant landmarks in modern anime? First off, it's beneficial to the grand scheme of things, since the credits of this show will serve as a very helpful blacklist for the anime industry. And then second, it's like the definitive example of what not to do. Basically, what X-Arm achieved is setting the bar so low that it can only get better from here. But that's also kinda not true. This anime is very dear to my heart. I genuinely think it's on par with some of the greatest comedy anime ever made. Like, they genuinely thought they were cooking with this, and that's what makes it so damn funny to laugh at. I remember watching the trailer of this when it initially came out. I heard a lot about it being appointed the next community punching bag, and I was a little skeptical until this screen popped up. And let me tell you, this killed me. Declaring war on sci-fi series around the world. This perplexing combination of words, along with these 2 confident, almost naive explanation points, cement this as a gem in the making. This is a piece of turd that has no awareness it was just crapped out of the stinkiest butthole alive. You could genuinely use this show to argue against people who think the moon landing was fake. Because are you seriously gonna tell me that CGI in 1969 looks infinitely superior to CGI in 2021? On this day, humanity received a grim reminder. Do not let Crunchyroll make anime originals. Overall, this anime is a pretty fun time. Just make sure, for the best possible experience, call up the boys and make absolutely sure you are not sober. After exploring the absolute rock bottom of the human experience, you might think that it can only go up from here, right? Well, yes, but no. These are some of the most horrific pieces of media I've ever laid eyes on. And that's exactly what I'm going to name this tier of shows. And I just want to preface this by saying that this list is still in order from worst to best, but the tiers represent a significant jump in quality from the show at the top of one tier to the bottom of the next. So keep that in mind and stay with me because we're just getting started. There is absolutely no way this is the worst ranked anime on my anime list. I mean, like, look at this, practically 4K. Oh shoot, we're getting some action now? Wait, what? No, that's sick. No way. Oh, bro, there's no way, bro. Everyone's gotta be lying about this anime. Honestly, this is on that level where if someone never watched anime before and they wanted to get into it, I'd recommend this to them. You know, I think this is a truly underrated gem. Okay, maybe I was too hasty. In all seriousness, this show is easily the most poorly edited show I've ever witnessed. The show feels like a fever dream that you barely remember and your brain is trying to connect everything. It's like one of those old school anime AMVs, but exclusively made up of the most boring clips. I also don't think I've ever laughed so hard at a CGI monster before. I don't know what it is with this squid, but it appeals to some deep-seated neuron in my brain to just make me die whenever I see this abomination on my screen. All the characters are, you know, I was about to say one-dimensional, but to be honest, I don't even think they are dimensional in the first place. They're just mouth breathers who unfortunately occupy space in this verse. You should watch this anime, I highly recommend it. So, Mars of Destruction is actually a really impressive show. It was directed by the same guy that made Skelter Heaven, and it's the second worst rated anime of all time. I mean, imagine the bragging rights that this guy has secured. 2 of the worst anime ever created to one person's name. And I'm not even making fun of this guy either. Bad medium is an art form, and these people are truly some of the greatest artists among us. So Mars of Destruction is about aliens invading Earth, and then as a response we send out the Waifu Defense Force equipped solely with guns that just don't work. They're trying to shoot the Power Ranger villains over here, and it's just pea shooters to them. I mean, you could say a lot about the show, but at least compared to Skelter Heaven, it's actually animated. Yo, what just happened? You know what? Maybe I judged this show too hastily. This death scene really got me thinking about, you know, how fragile life is, and we should always strive to cherish it while we can. I truly didn't know that Mars of Destruction could get this deep. Soon after, we're introduced to the dude that's supposed to be humanity's one ray of hope, and bro just gets folded by these level 1 alien goons. You know, watching this show truly gives a lot of perspective. Evangelion was clearly inspired by this masterpiece, and it really shows throughout the entire show. So obviously this show is great, but we haven't even gotten to the best part of it. The fight scenes. I personally think it was extremely generous of the creators of this piece of art to allow Beethoven to compose for it. As we all know, this was really where his career got the jumpstart it deserved, since his composition here really complemented the show and elevated these scenes to a higher existence. Yeah, so the rest of the show is just about as good as this. I personally think it's around the same tier as the likes of Vinland Saga and Berserk. I don't know, what do you guys think? Overall, it's a great 240p experience. I'm not even gonna hold you, this anime was a mistake. You might have heard folks talk about Handshakers probably having the single worst production in anime, and yeah, that's definitely true. And we'll get into that, but I think the trash runs way deeper than one might think. So this anime's plot is like, a guy comes upon an unconscious girl who I guess changes the course of his life and grants him superpowers. I swear to God, this is like the definitive anime cliche. Doing this type of plot in an anime in the year of our Lord 2025 is like ending a horror novel with "It was all a dream." A guy approaches a girl in a hospital bed, and then anime things happen. Oh shoot, wrong anime. Okay, yeah, that's it. So this is a death game kind of anime with a big twist. There's no death. Basically, when they have their 5 frames per second seizure-inducing fight scenes in the anime world, fatal blows count as basically a slap on the wrist in the real world, which is honestly impressive how they're able to find the easiest method to systematically dismantle any stakes this show ever had. And then there's also this.
この間お風呂覗いたらちょっと弟のこと愛してるって変かしらね
Her little brother is 14. Look, handshakers. If I wanted to watch Boku no Pico, I'd kill myself. So talking about the animation now, I mean, you've been seeing it on screen. I think out of all the sins that this show commits, by far the worst and arguably the funniest is that you yourself can go on YouTube, search up green screen fire, and you'll have better CGI than whatever the hell this is. I really found it so weird how hard the show is to look at. Like, genuinely, it puts a massive strain on my eyeballs. And that's not even being hyperbolic. It hurts to watch this show. So actually looking into it, it turns out that one of the main decisions in the production of the show was to have the character models move at different frame rates than everything else. So like, for example, there'd be a fight scene where the characters would move downwards of 6 frames per second, and then everything else, like their CGI weapon models, will move at 30 frames per second. I genuinely feel like this show gotta be the equivalent of like a lethal injection for people with ADHD. Most of the times, if my eyes aren't being completely assaulted, I can't even physically comprehend what's going on screen. 10 out of 10 would recommend. World's End Harem is like the final boss of the male fantasy. All the men get wiped out from the face of the earth due to some virus, and you're the only one alive tasked with satisfying the needs of over 1 billion women. So obviously with a premise like this, there comes some expectations. Basically, this is what you expect, and this is what you don't expect. So what if I told you that in reality, we get this, but objectively just 20 times worse? The main character is obviously one of these men that survived the virus and was granted the difficult task of having sex with as many women as possible. But here's the twist. He's more useless than a condom in a Smash tournament, bro. I just hate this bitch so much, bro. Basically, there's this one girl that he had a crush on a long time ago, and he's trying to save his virginity for her, but she's gone missing. So throughout the entire show, he looks for her while dodging and weaving the sexual advances of like a couple billion women. I mean, listen, of all things, I think the premise is actually the least important aspect when judging the quality of a show. That being said, how the hell are you gonna bait everyone to your show, give them the middle finger in the first episode, then just proceed to craft the most 2 out of 10 plot and narrative I've ever witnessed? People who went into this show wanting a serious story don't exist, but if they did, they would not be impressed by anything this story does. So ultimately, this is a very brave show. It defies every single expectation of the audience and then crafts a story that truly anyone can get behind hating. And that's just how it be from time to time. Sometimes bravery is about your resolve to just jump off a cliff with no strings attached. So the end of this tier marks the end of the single worst set of shows I've ever laid eyes on. So yes, it does get better, but it's still really bad. Like, this is still gonna be some stinky garbage. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention before that I organized this list based solely off of my anime list. It's not a sponsor, it's just convenient. So if your favorite sci-fi anime is not on this list, it may just not be on my anime list. Or I've talked about it in another video. In either case, I would just skip over that anime. Okay, so imagine you enter a Gundam store. You see a ton of cool, pristine models from all the classic mecha shows. Yet you turn your attention to some stench that fills your nostrils. This is Infinite Stratos, a show that you have already seen. Guaranteed. It is the most deja vu inducing bundle of tropes and cliches that will have your brain go completely AFK while watching this. And that's the real reason this show is so low, because of how unforgivingly boring it is. It's about this world where only women can pilot mechas, with the shocking exception of our main character. So of course every female in this world wants his micro penis of his, and the show turns into a harem. And although I was almost as surprised about this turn of events as gravity, there's always at least a slim chance to turn things around. I'm usually not a fan of when anime do harems or stuff like that, but it could always work out given good fleshed out characters and a good dynamic. This one's a childhood tsundere. Enough said. This one's a Chinese lolly. This one is a childhood tsundere, but just on New Game Plus. And then this one's French. So at this point, you could probably just tell the moment I absolutely gave up on the dream that I'll be seeing anything of nuance in this show. It was the French girl. This show is like the punchline of its own shitty joke. It's about this main character who gains power-ups whenever he sees panties. Sorry for the awkward pause, I just killed myself 7 times over. I gained secondhand embarrassment just from reading that out loud. Shit like this is the reason that people used to get bullied for liking anime back in the day. This has the comedy tag under the show's genres, but I'm genuinely curious how it's even possible to laugh at this. This show is like the fart that killed the conversation, bruh. It's just terrible. This show doesn't have the worst animation, it doesn't have the worst plot, and it doesn't even have the worst premise, but it is one of the worst anime I've ever watched. The premise is simple and admittedly pretty commonplace if you've ever seen a single hentai. There are like these monsters who attack humans to steal their sexual drive from them. So then to counteract this existential threat to humanity, they deploy some teenagers to get naked around these monsters and be extra horny. So at first, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty excited. This had everything it could possibly need to be a great comedy anime. Yes, I genuinely believed that this was going to be a parody, but it actually takes itself seriously, and this shit's bad. I can't even say that this show has fan service since all the nudity is baked into the plot itself. The show found a loophole in the stupidest possible way, but that doesn't even mean anything when the rest of the show has writing that can't even reach the same quality as writing in porn. The reality is that nobody who watches this through is actually here for the plot, which really just confuses me to no end. Genuinely, the ecchi genre has always been the greatest mystery to me. Like, from my perspective, it just exists in this awkward limbo of simultaneously being diet hentai while also being 100% serious, locked in on its narrative. And the end result is just this indecisive mess where I could just imagine the target audience getting edged for like 12 whole episodes. At that point, just go to the extreme. Okay, so I just had someone explain it to me in real life as a sort of pre-workout so that you can enjoy a more fulfilling workout, you know, at the gym. And I seriously did not know people take this shit that seriously. Like, for the longest time, I've been running casual. I didn't know there's a ranked mode. Yeah, so I guess I recommend this show if you want to be a grandmaster gooner. Go for it. Okay, I was thinking of the best way to articulate how downright strange and absurd I found this show to be. And I feel like the easiest way is to just describe what happens. Okay, so we're introduced to this guy starting high school who, what's the best way to put this? He has a thing for girls with twin tails. I kind of don't want to call it a fetish because, you know, I'm gonna call it how I see it. This guy has a twin tail fetish, which is something that if someone told me they had in real life, I'd expect their name to be on the Diddy list. I've never personally seen a girl over the age of like 13 have this hairstyle. But anyways, moving on. So he decides to take the next step in furthering his social life in high school by doing the obvious thing and starting Twin Tails Club. You're pretty much just advertising your virginity at that point, bruh. But then everything changes as aliens invade Earth to claim all the twin tails for themselves. And the only way to fight against the twin-tailed gooners is to become a twin-tailed gooner. You might think this would be a funny watch, and I did too, but this show takes itself way too seriously, to the point where I genuinely think the author is just inserting himself into the main character, which is a thought I don't really want to think about right now, or ever, so let's just move on. Hybrid X Heart Magias Academy Ataraxia is a show that is so horny that the My Anime List synopsis self-reported on its own degeneracy. Hida Kizuna possesses the HHG ability, and then blah blah blah, he transfers to a sci-fi magic academy where many of the students many of which are large-breasted girls, use their HHG abilities to fight invaders from another world while wearing extremely skimpy pilot outfits. Apparently, having erotic experiences with Kizuna will allow these girls to replenish their energy. Oh wow, you don't say. One thing that actually impressed me with this show is the sheer optimization when it came to all the girls' uniforms. Like, it's genuinely so skimpy that it basically just ceases being clothing. I've never seen a show with such little respect for its female characters. Every scene they're either wearing 2-centimeter wide straps that cover their tits or ass, or just completely naked. I mean, if you like this, you know what you like, but it's trash and you know it. You may love a painting. You may think that the attention to detail is supreme and the depiction uniquely evocative. But then someone posts that painting onto Twitter with the caption, "Anybody with eyes can tell that this piece of shit was AI generated." And then the image they post is just a painting zoomed into a pixel that coincides with a specific X and Y coordinate. And then the reason I bring this up is because I hate when people ruin things, but also to highlight the fact that just because one person may like a thing, that doesn't mean that someone else will like it too. Although at the end of the day, we can all come to a civilized understanding that it is a genuine piece of art that has value in some form to some people. But of course, that understanding doesn't apply to Gibier. Gibier is one of those pieces of fiction that genuinely concerns me. It's a show that occupies no space. My experience watching this was like Doctor Strange separating my mind from my body. It's like this vacuum-like nothingness that will never make you feel anything, good or bad. This is like an objectively horrible piece of media, but I don't even hate it. This show isn't even worthy of having strong emotions attached to it. So you're probably wondering by now what this show is even about. Well, so we have a very interesting and original sci-fi setting where society has collapsed because of a virus, which for some reason are depicted as like virus monsters. Honestly, I got lost here. But there's hope because there's this doctor that's working on a cure, although he needs protection. So these Edo period samurai and ninja time leap into the future to protect this doctor from the virus. I think, just my personal opinion, if you created some Wattpad fanfiction when you were 13, I think you should just keep that on Wattpad and never allow it to see the light of day. This show insulted my patience and time. And when I say that this show wasted my time, it genuinely felt like King Crimson deleted an hour of my day and gave me the middle finger. This shows what happens when indecisive people make indecisive media. I can just imagine the author of Kingdom of Ruin looking at a dozen genres he was interested in, and it was just like, alright, let's put them all in the pot and see what comes out. I could bash on the writing and its grotesque state of production, but it's also a show that never forms an identity for itself. It would be like insulting a newborn baby for not bringing anything to the table. Like, you don't exist in a complete state. So I'm not even gonna lie to any of y'all, this was coming out in like 2015 and I ate this shit up. This was one of those light novel adaptations before the light novel meta became isekai. This piece of shit is set in you guessed it, Magic High School, just like every other Soulless Husk A1 picture adapted in 2015. So I was looking at the poster art of this show just to refresh my memory on what exactly I was getting myself into. I pretty much assumed that these girls plastered on the sides are all part of the main guy's harem, although as I would soon find out, this is actually his sister. But if you're in the know about light novels or their adaptations, you know that this fact that she's his sister actually means nothing. So the one thing that is clearly out of place here is this random dude. As we all know, it's strictly against everything light novels stand for to have a likable or competent guy other than the main character. I mean, it's simple psychology. Other men will just stand in the way of your power fantasy self-insert harem. Ultimately, they'll just compete with you for the anime waifus. So naturally, I was pretty curious on how Asterix War would get around this dilemma. And it turns out that his name is Lester McPhail. Lester McPhail. I'm not gonna lie, I really just despise this anime and everything it stands for. Genuinely, my entire time watching this, my face was locked in an absolute look of disgust, like I just saw a cockroach or something. Since this show is a living, breathing reminder of how dog shit my taste was back then. It's the same feeling I get when I remember the fact that I used to watch Leafy is Here. Possibly the single human being I have the least respect for on this planet. So I'm gonna do myself a favor here and stop cringing while talking about this shit. So Ken Cole is a show that is about these girls who are based off of battleships. Okay, this is by far the strangest shit on this list. I found out these girls are not only supposed to represent battleships, but apparently they are battleships. You know, I think I know who this anime is for. It's for that one kid in high school that you knew that would never shut up about World War II or like tanks. I knew a guy who'd probably recognize every single battleship reference made in the show. He'd goon to this. Alright, so that puts a pin in the Stinky Garbage tier. And next up we get to the mid tier. And this is a bulky tier, and I low-key don't want to spend most of this video just talking about mid shit. So there's gonna come a point where I just start speedrunning these shows. So be prepared for that. Oh, also, I want to emphasize that I'm taking a 50% writing, 50% enjoyment approach to my rankings, like always. At the end of the day, this is my list, so I can admit that something is well written, but if I don't actually enjoy my time watching it, it's not going to rank the highest. Wait, what? What's this? 1 cup of Gurren Lagann, 2 tablespoons of granulated Evangelion, 3 teaspoons of Gundam, and what is this? 47 metric tons of diarrhea? What are these ingredients for? Oh, Darling in the Franxx. Yeah, that makes sense. So I really have one pressing question for anime fans out there. One that I've been pondering for the past 6 years. How the hell did Darling in the Franxx ever get popular? I've been a day one hater of this show ever since it came out, and a lot of people might tentatively agree with me because it's pretty universally agreed upon that the ending is dog shit, but we are not the same. I've hated this show since episode 1. Every character was written extremely childishly, and that's fine. I'm pretty sure they're all teenagers in the show. But the main thing to realize is that when authors write childish characters, they don't stay childish for the entire show. Hiro remains a childish, generic-ass main character right up until the end. None of them change at all. They just kept being annoying the entire time. Genuinely, the only enjoyable part of this anime was the fact that Trigger was behind the entire production, which made the show look good on the outside, but that shit was extremely smelly on the inside. Like those guys that put on deodorant instead of showering. Like, you're not slick, my dude. We know, everyone knows. Also, I feel like the show, speaking in a holistic sense, really lacks in the creativity department. Like, genuinely, I'm not even kidding. I thought this was an Evangelion parody when I first watched it, and explaining it would probably be less effective than just showing you, side by side. That's honestly really shameless. Other than that, the show was really just boring to me because I didn't care about any of the characters, but that's just me. Watching this anime was like reading one of those Wattpad parody fanfictions where things just be happening and shit just be going down, but you don't know why and you're all just there for the train crash. Like, reading the synopsis of this anime alone gave me an aneurysm. I'm gonna paraphrase here because it's long as hell. Guided by her visions revealing the location of the King of Salvation, Joan of Arc flees with Leonardo da Vinci. There she encounters Nobunaga Oda. Quickly convinced that Nobunaga is indeed the King of Salvation, John pledges allegiance to the Oda clan. Meanwhile, King Arthur, the ruler of the West Star, sends his ruthless general Gaius Julius Caesar and his combat machine to conquer Nobunaga's planet and seize the Holy Grail. They really just said, let's take Fate Zero, make it 20 IQ. This show's funny. Okay, so immediately going into this one, the vibes were just off. I don't know exactly what it was with Dramatical Murder, but I really was just not feeling it. Only after watching it did I realize it was an adaptation of an infamous yaoi visual novel that's known for being intensely yaoi. Yeah, this is the type of show I'd sit down and enjoy only after quantum tunneling to a different dimension that is the exact opposite of our own. It's just really, really not my thing. I have no problems with the genre in general, but it's just not my thing. What is something that you irrationally hate? For me, I have a top 3. Let's see, what do we have here? Business majors, those people that will always have a strong opinion on a show you like, and then after pressing them on it, they admit that their entire experience of that show boils down to TikTok clips and memes. Yeah, they should be thrown to the lions. And the last but not least, I despise anime where the main character has a little sister complex. It's honestly mind-numbing that you can make an entire genre out of shows that do this weird ass shit. And if it was a genre, a regular at Magic High School is like the raid boss of it. It's some real stinky shit. This show comes from that era of light novel adaptations before isekai, where the protagonist is an overpowered fuckboy that goes to a magic academy. And this one was one of the more popular shows in that era. The main character is stupidly overpowered, like to the point where it's immediately evident that this show is just brainless self-insert schlop that's served to 13-year-olds. And an overpowered protagonist isn't a big enough iceberg to sink the ship. Just look at Mob Psycho. But this show just fully embraces the fact that this motherfucker is this flawless, omniscient badass who always comes home from his magic academy every day to have sex with his sister. There's seriously no other substance to this show. So in chemistry, there's this concept called percent yield, right? It's basically how much is produced compared to how much it should produce. In this show, simply titled 100, as you might be able to guess, has a 100% yield of unfiltered garbage. It's a sci-fi harem mecha light novel adaptation, and I really don't think I need to say more. You know what? Hot take, I actually prefer the isekai era of light novels over sci-fi era, because at least the trash of isekai is at least like semi-fun to watch. Date A Live is certainly a show, one that is very popular for God knows what reason. There's like 7,000 seasons of this shit. Like, who the hell is still watching Date A Live? Seriously. So the show is about a guy who's in love with his little sister, of course, and after some plot stuff happens, he now has to apparently date a bunch of girls so that a metric ton of earth-threatening earthquakes don't get unleashed. So from this point forward, there's like a 0% chance I'm gonna mess with this show at all. It's more powerful than a fumble, really. It's like an active repellent. It's telling me to stay far away. And then add gross fan service and cringeworthy character writing to the mix, and you get a story that is extremely easy for me to despise. Naruto is one of those anime where you look at the synopsis and it just reads like a straight up joke. An ordinary high school student is suddenly attacked by a dangerous monster. Just when everything seems to be lost, he is saved by a silver-haired girl who claims to be a shape-shifting deity from the horror author H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, sent by the Space Defense Agency to Earth. You know, the worst part about this shit is that most guys in this situation would still be like, hell yeah bro, I can still fix her. And our main character is the same way. This is a comedy anime and I never really laughed. It was just kind of weird. Ground Control to Psychoelectric Girl is about this strange girl who claims to be an alien. And the guy's like, no, and then the girl's like, yes, also there are others like me. And everyone knows that you can't argue with schizophrenia, so they move in together. This is basically just Fooly Cooly without anything that made Fooly Cooly interesting or cool or anything. Let me know if this synopsis sounds familiar to you. Ordinary high school dude is going about his daily business until he stumbles upon a girl of mysterious origins. Then it turns out that this girl is like this extremely submissive bum with nowhere to go or stay, so she's solely dependent on the dude, while for the entire show hinting at a slave master dynamic. I see this type of shit way too often in anime and I despise every aspect of it. It appeals to a certain audience, and that audience is absolutely not me. Cat Planet Cuties is quite literally the same show, but instead the mysterious alien girl is also a cat girl. Unbreakable Machine Doll is set in this steampunk version of England where these dudes called puppeteers controlled these dolls, which seemed interesting for like 2 milliseconds before it devolved into a harem with a collective IQ of 20 between the entire cast. Okay, I'm gonna start going fast. Occultic 9 feels like a failed attempt at mixing Durara and Steins Gate. Carnaval seemed interesting at first with its mystery it was building up the entire show, but quickly turned to disappointment as it revealed yaoi. Freezing had the ingenious idea to integrate edgy bullshit into a generic 2010s ecchi harem show. The right answer presents some interesting sci-fi concepts, but suffers from a severe pacing issue. And I don't care about any of the characters issue. Rene flopped harder than Uzumaki. Actually, that's not true. I had no expectations for this shit. Okay, so imagine this for a second. What if we took an isekai protagonist and then isekai'd him into a non-isekai show? Why Does Nobody Remember Me in This World is a painstaking reminder of the old saying, if you don't have the budget, don't make the damn show. The animation in this shit was like playing a visual novel. And everything else was bad, don't watch. For Rhythm Across Blue is a sci-fi show where everyone has these flying boots, which make them all significantly less cool versions of the Vinsmoke family. And they're all playing this game where they need to use their boots. I'm not gonna lie, more than anything, this show just made me want to put on my pajamas and that one nightcap that Squidward always be wearing and just go to sleep. This show is so boring. Okay, so immediately before anything else, I just want to deliver a public service warning. The mascot in this anime is named Paimon. I understand if this show would be too traumatic for some of you. So anyways, Gatchaman Crowd is about a group of guys who fight off aliens and save Earth from the shadows. There's not really much going on in this show, to be honest. Missed opportunities and disappointment, the anime. Qualidia Code is one of many of these shows on this list that are gifted with these really interesting and creative worlds, but they just mess everything up in the writing department. This show is kind of like an apocalyptic sci-fi show, sort of resembles Seraph of the End, but shittier. Clockwork Planet almost tricked me with a pretty interesting premise. So Earth was about to go extinct some time ago until this really smart guy, not named Elon Musk, decided to rebuild all of Earth using clockwork, which are like these gears floating in space. A pretty far-fetched and slightly absurd concept, but at least it was different. Then it just turned into boy meets girl, gets superpower, blah blah blah, shit show, generic as it could get. A Girl Who Chants Love at the Bound of This World is a show about a dude who gets informed in a letter from his dad of the existence of parallel worlds, and he is also given the means of traveling between these worlds. So the show is basically about him searching for his missing dad through his power to travel through parallel dimensions. Sounds pretty cool. You know what doesn't sound cool? The fact that this is a single core anime based off of a video game with 50 hours of story. Yeah, it basically tries to tell the same story in 1/5 of the time. And while watching it, it physically feels like the actual story is 5 times bigger than what we're actually seeing. I haven't played the game, so I don't know anything about that, but this is some trash. Angel falls from the sky and starts calling some random high school nobody master. It's really concerning the sheer popularity of this anime trope. And well, Heaven's Lost Property does this shit, but I guess slightly better. At least the characters aren't insufferable and there's more substance to the girl than her tits. It's kind of sad that that's where the bar is at, but it is what it is. Azure Lane is a name I swore I've heard before. It sounded weirdly familiar, and that's because it was one of those gacha games that every YouTuber and their mother was sponsored by a couple years back. And they turned this gacha game into an anime. What a stellar idea. I'm sure nothing could go wrong here. Yeah, I don't know if the writers were intentionally trying to make the plot an obvious summary of the cutscenes from the game, but they even failed at that. Have you ever scrolled down my anime list and you see a show that you recognize and vividly remember watching, but you literally just can't remember anything that happens in it? Yeah, Beatless is that show for me. It's your bread and butter boy meets girl and his whole world changes. But except this time, that bread is stale and that butter is spoiled. Because my god, this is like the 50th anime I've seen do this shit just when working on this video. And you might think 50 is an exaggeration. And well, you're right. I made that number up on the spot. But the worst part is that it's actually somewhat accurate. Metallic Rogue was an anime produced by Studio Bones. Yeah, I was prepared to be eating good. It's this heavily cyberpunk, yet also traditional sci-fi inspired world with a potentially interesting class struggle between androids and humans. Although ultimately the plot seemed way too indecisive. Starts out as a crime story, turns into a robot revolution, slowly becomes a fake memory identity story, and ultimately all this depth is meant to lead you to the mandatory mecha battle at the end of each episode, of course. This show is also way too convoluted for its own good. I understood Ava more than this shit. Okay, that's a lie, but you get my point. The money and soul of possibility has a world which I could only assume to be a reaction of the 2008 housing market crash. It's a world where the economy has been in shambles for a long time, and most people are struggling to make ends meet. Our MC is this broke college kid who's an econ major, so after finishing all of his coloring sheets, he goes to work so he could survive. And then his life suddenly turns upside down when he's paired with this girl of mysterious origins, and they're forced to win duels with their life as collateral. At the end of the day, it's kind of an average show, but I gave her points for having an interesting world. So this show is about it takes place in this post-apocalyptic world where humanity is on the brink of destruction and all that. They're threatened by alien-like monsters who inflict a virus on anyone they kill Okay, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't intrinsically have anything wrong with this premise, but I can genuinely feel the setting of these shows repeating over and over again. But I mean, that's fine. As long as the execution is good, that's all that matters. And it tries to be dark and serious, but the characters I could just not take seriously. The dialogue is some of the most nonsensical I've seen in a while. They try to compensate for that by just having some completely unnecessary fan service. And I feel like, especially for this show, I don't even want to know the age of these characters that the show basically treats like sex objects. Okay, so my first thought going into this show is that this bitch looks like a JRPG protagonist. There's no hiding from me. I can spot your asses from a mile away. And yes, this is a game adaptation. I've never really heard of it, but hey, this seriously has the chance to blow me away. Recent precedents have really set the bar with video game adaptations. Like, Arcane might very well just be my favorite thing ever. But unfortunately, this is no Arcane. The CGI is not the worst I've ever seen, but the monsters are definitely up there as some of the ugliest I've ever seen. Like, the monsters in the show genuinely have some of the most confusing designs that look like they just mashed together the results of an asset randomizer, and that's the big baddies. Overall, the story was just not it. It seems like they didn't really know what they were doing when they were converting a game story to a show. So like, you could easily tell when scenes are like an action boss fight or just random cutscenes. I've heard from people that the game is way better anyways, so if you want to consume Scarlet Nexus, let it not be the anime. Eden Zero kinda pissed me off. So this show is made by the same person that did Fairy Tail. So obviously I went to show expecting some absolute cinema. What I wasn't expecting was for this to be the same exact show, but set in a sci-fi world. Like, genuinely, I don't think this author is capable of writing something other than Fairy Tail. The main character is the same exact person. Every single female character is just a tool for fan service, and the author is so damn lazy that he didn't even bother creating a new mascot. It's the same blue cat guy. Although the real thing that pissed me off with this show is that this isn't science fiction. It's a fantasy covered with a sci-fi wrapping paper. There's always a suspension of disbelief with science fiction. But what I've always loved about the genre is that if the world is well thought out enough, then any futuristic world could be made believable. But it's easy to tell when no thought was put into a world, to the point where none of it makes any pragmatic sense. Eden Zero would definitely be something I recommend to everyone 12 and under. Anyone else will see this turd as a shit. So this is another mecha action apocalyptic high school drama comedy sci-fi romance fan service show that really tried to be the most 5 out of 10 shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, it really puts the effort in to accomplish being so hopelessly mediocre. Plain tofu main character who's still in his teenage years meets manic pixie anime waifu, and then she grants the protag some crazy power for whatever reason, and he joins the organization that she comes from called... You could literally take however long you want. Hell, make a spreadsheet, a Microsoft Excel database of possible combination of English words. You won't guess the name of this organization. It's called Funeral Parlor. Look, just because that opening is pretty good doesn't mean anything. Even a pretty good production doesn't save it either. Just because the drawings are pretty to look at doesn't change the fact that they're cardboard cutouts. No character in this show ever struck me as especially interesting, and they just felt one-dimensional. So now we put the mid-tier to rest and officially take a peek out of the trenches as we start to talk about the shows that genuinely did entertain me. These are shows I found pretty decent. This is Darwin's Game. Mirai Nikki was trash, but at least it was fun. New gen death game anime usually just boiled down to the oh shit, shock value gore scene, or what the hell am I watching? These shows typically tend to differentiate themselves solely with the color of the yandere's hair. Darwin's Game is a show that somewhat fits in with the rest of these. Its characters are kind of uninteresting and sometimes cringe. The writing is messy, like how do you clear an entire city for your shitty mobile game app death game just for one night, and then come daytime everyone just spawns back in? It's a question that even the writer probably doesn't even know himself. Although I've always been a sucker for death game media done right. Like, I was that one annoying prick during quarantine who wouldn't shut up about Squid Game. And Darwin's Game is just okay. It relies way too much on just shock value. And shock value by definition is cheap. It's indicative of poor writing and a lack of ability when it comes to building stakes. But it's still exciting. It might not be the most substantial thing in the world, but at least it's interesting. I was entertained my whole time watching this show, and that's more than I could say for any show in the mid-tier. Accel World is about a guy that gets trapped in a game world and has to level up and fight his way to the top to meet the creator of the game. And throughout my whole time watching this, I just couldn't help but think, what is this? Food 8 online? Like, this is the definition of a bootleg ass anime. What's next? Hunger x Hunger? Full Plate Alchemist? My Hero Cafeteria? 7 Deadly Chins? Okay, I have to stop before I get canceled. So Accel World is actually made by the same guy that made Sword Art Online, and I think I actually like this one more. Of course, that's not saying much. I'm not a Sword Art Online dick rider, aka 14 years old, so it's not exactly a tall order. Although Accel World, I think, has some more fleshed out ideas, and it's for the most part just a show to turn your brain off and chill with. Waiting in the Summer is about this dude who's playing with a camera one day, and then he gets his shit rocked by what the audience can only assume is some sort of comet. And then for the whole show, he and his friends are making a movie out of his recording. It's this drama-filled romance where the main conflict is this very messy love polygon. And I mean, hey man, I could do a ton of things with polygons. As an engineering student, I'm your guy, whatever you need. Surface integral? Easy. Outward flux? Nothing. Heat capacity, that shit's elementary. But if you're seriously asking me with a straight face to analyze a high school love polygon anime, you might as well just put a gun to my head. I won't budge. I dare you. I double dog dare you, motherfucker. Yeah, that's what I thought. So this is a show that I completely and utterly forgot existed. So I revisited a little of it, and I think I know why I don't remember it. It's just kind of meh. Not great, not the worst thing I've ever seen, but I do gotta give it props. The premise was pretty interesting. So the main character ends up being framed for a crime, and he gets sent to this strange prison where the inmates all compete in these sadistic death games, for whatever reason. Overall, the writing wasn't impeccable, but it was always just a fun show with backshit insane characters. Although really fumbled by the end. If Dimension W has one thing going for it, it's probably its originality. Humanity one day discovered another dimension that gave access to a completely new source of energy called coil. These coils were quickly commodified by private businesses, and our main character is essentially a bounty hunter who hunts down illegal coils. It's like an episodic road trip kind of show that's just a chill time set in a cool world. Listeners is one of the more disappointing shows on this list. It starts out really strong with an interesting premise. It lives in this world where music doesn't really exist as we know it, so the show sets itself up to be a story about some kids trying to restore music to its former glory. But it turns out to just be a half-baked mecha show with a pretty flaccid script and characters that don't even feel like they have any chemistry with each other. I also didn't like any of its soundtrack, which is pretty important for a show with this type of premise. And I know something like that is pretty subjective, but hey, it's my list. The pacing of this show is like Roadrunner, if anyone remembers that show. It's either going Mach 20 or just completely stationary. Overall, taking into consideration all the glaringly obvious flaws within the writing and pacing, I'd give this show a clean 5 out of 10. But Studio Shaft went absolutely wild with this show for literally no reason, so that gives it some points. This show isn't anything special. God Eater is your cookie cutter monster apocalypse type of show that doesn't really add anything new. The story doesn't especially fail in doing anything, but it doesn't really accomplish anything either. Where this show really shines is its production. Holy shit, does every frame of this show look beautiful. It's Ufotable doing Ufotable things, and that's really the highlight of this show, just looking at the pretty colors. Largely considered the first proper anime to escape from Japan, Astro Boy immediately became iconic for everyone living in that era. It's about a robot named Atom who always happens to save the day from crooked evil dudes. Personally, I didn't grow up watching Astro Boy. I mean, it's like 4 decades older than me. So this is a type of show that may be nostalgic to some, but me watching it right now, it kind of got me snoozing. I gotta pay my respects though, and I'm pretty sure this was made for a younger audience anyways. As a side note, it's actually kind of depressing that the show is supposed to be set in a highly advanced, almost utopian futuristic society, and then the year it's supposed to take place in is 2003. So you're telling me 22 years ago we were supposed to have flying cars? Like, we definitely in the wrong timeline, bro. I see sci-fi do this shit so often. Like, do you know the sheer amount of sci-fi media set in 2030? That shit's in 5 years, bro. Are you seriously promising me the secrets of quantum mechanics in a Dyson sphere before I even turn 30? I mean, hey man, dream for the stars, reach the moon. Urusei Yatsura 2022 is a reboot of the original that came out in 1981. Holy shit. So yeah, this one's for all the unks and the old heads out there. Me, never watching the original, went into this basically expecting nothing, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a charming show. It wasn't like the funniest thing to me, but it had its moments. It reminded me of one of those cartoons you just put in the background to chill with. And I'm sure the fans of the original will eat this shit up, because David Productions didn't hold anything back for this one. To be or not to be. I'm sure you've probably heard this famous quote before, but real ones know it as to be or not to be. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. Well, funnily enough, I'm not a real one, since the only thing I've ever known Nier Automata for was 2B, and apparently the game got an anime. And, well, I had pretty low expectations of it from everything I've seen, but this anime introduced me into a world that immediately interested me with cool characters. Although none of it actually made me want to continue watching this adaptation. Honestly, just made me want to play the game. Everything I liked about it was just things that the adaptation took from the game. What the adaptation did add was an absolutely horrific presentation. So yeah, don't watch this, play the game. SSS Gridman struck me as a pretty generic, almost cheesy kind of mecha show. It's kind of just a cookie cutter 90s cartoon bad guy of the day sort of anime. And I mean, if you need any greater proof, just look at these monsters. Although it is animated by Studio Trigger, and the show does have style. For people who are fans of the original and that kind of old school mecha anime, it'll probably be a great watch for them. Decadence had everything going for it. It's set in this post-apocalyptic world where all of humanity was forced to encase themselves into a mobile fortress they call Decadence because of these man-eating monsters. Its world is essentially if Attack on Titan and Monster Hunter had a baby. It sounds amazing, and the ideas in this show are amazing. It's just that the execution wasn't there, and the presentation beyond the first couple episodes was just lackluster. Unfortunately, Sabikui Bisco falls into the pile of anime that I really wanted to like because of how bizarre and fun the show looked, but in the end, it just turned to disappointment. It takes place in this cyberpunk sort of world that has been infected with this rust disease, and our main character is trying to find a cure for it. The soundtrack is a banger in this show, and that's honestly the main reason I had high hopes for it. But at the end of the day, the writing was just kind of laughable. ID Invaded is an exciting psycho thriller that will have you at the edge of your seat and at the edge of your IQ, because this is one of those mystery detective shows, but they have the power to travel into the psyche of the victims. Sounds easy, right? All they have to do is find the victim, tap into their mind, and find out what actually happened. Well, that's actually easier said than done, since a human being's mind is incredibly complicated, and the show has a great visual representation of that complexity. It's kind of a cool semi-episodic show where our main character and his backstory really being the glue that keeps them together. Akudama Drive is about these elite criminals turned fugitives that are one day called to one place to accomplish one goal. It will be a suicide mission. One may even be able to call them the Suicide Squad. This guy's like Uvojin from Hunter x Hunter if he had dreadlocks. This guy's like Motorcycle Spider-Man because he shoots webs from his motorcycle. That's actually really cool. And then the girl over here, she's... well, don't worry guys. I can fix her. The whole show takes place in this cyberpunk world, which honestly might be my favorite setting in anime and media in general. The characters are these over-the-top, outlandish goofballs, and it all mixes together to create a show that prioritizes being dumb fun over everything else. And I always appreciate stuff like this. Talk to OP Destiny is another monster apocalyptic type of show, but this time it has a gimmick. Basically, music was banned across all of society since it agitates the monsters, but this fact is actually used against those monsters since the main weapons against them are conductors and women who represent the pieces of music themselves. First of all, this show looks beautiful. Two of the best studios to ever do it, Mappa and Madhouse, did a tag team for this one. And it shows. But I think this show is the greatest example of style over substance. The concepts and narrative are as developed as they needed to be so that they could advertise their shitty gacha game. And look, I don't hate this show. You could easily have a good time with it and it's pretty good to look at. But to me, it genuinely feels like new gen Guilty Gear. Guilty Crown. I meant Guilty Crown. Terraformers was something I'd always hear about, for its downright absurd premise and amazing art. But that was just for the manga. The anime is a different story. But first, Terraformers is about humans one day deciding to send resilient species to the uninhabitable Mars so that one day they may be able to terraform it. Many centuries later, a virus breaks out on Earth and a team of 100 men and women are sent off to Mars to look for a cure. And, well... it's not a pretty sight. As it turns out, one of the main species shipped off to Mars were cockroaches. And after all that time left alone on this planet, they evolved from a worthless beta cuck insect to a whole ass Baki character on steroids. I really like the premise and everything that the show had going for it. I read some of the manga a while back, so I actually did know how it turned out. A little bit of a disappointment. For the manga. For the anime, yeah, this shit kinda sucked. The reason for me is mostly centered around the expectations the show set up for me. I was really ready to lock in on this intense survival thriller with people dying left and right, but what I got was a surprisingly slow-paced romance. And that really threw me in for a loop. And this anime doesn't even have goated art like the manga, so there's not much positive I could say about it. Sakugan is like Made in Abyss, except if it focused on daddy issues instead of mommy issues. Or at least that's how it seemed at first. The show got off to a pretty good start where humanity has been living underground and has been constantly under threat by monsters called, kaiju. I guess they weren't feeling creative. For me, the premise started out as a strong 7.5 out of 10. But then everything to come after was like a 5. They fumbled a lot towards the middle part and it never really recovered. Have you ever done something so cringeworthy or awkward that you would sell off your Bitcoin for the chance to turn back time and not call your high school teacher mom or use a skibbity toilet pickup line? My personal example of this was when I was trying to rizz up a girl and I started the conversation with, yeah, so I was doing my Genshin dailies. Yeah, so as you would probably expect, that girl ended up becoming my girlfriend. And so I guess the moral of this story is that Genshin players are intrinsically predisposed to getting women. They just won't be 5 stars most of the time. Now, the actual moral of the story is that sometimes it's better not to erase the past, but to learn from it. Orange is a show about a high school girl that suddenly starts to receive letters that are supposedly written by herself 10 years in the future to warn her about various regrets she has. Although the biggest warning she's received is that one of her friends and potential love interest will die. And I immediately thought this was gonna have the same trajectory as something like Erased, a sort of murder mystery, but this show took a completely different route. It has more of a slice of life structure to it, where, being completely honest, not a lot happens in each episode. It definitely has more shoujo, cry at the end kind of vibes to it. Beautiful show, but not my thing at the end of the day. Knights of Sidonia is a very interesting one. It's about this post-apocalyptic world where aliens decimated nearly the entire human race, but the ones that did survive are aboard a massive ship called Sidonia, but they're still being endlessly pursued by these aliens, and it's really a riveting show that will always have you at the edge of your seat. Although there's one huge thing keeping the show back. It's just ugly to look at. Like, whenever I see a full CGI anime that's not Studio Orange, I just cringe. So a certain magical index is part of a franchise with other notable entries like a certain scientific railgun, a certain scientific accelerator, a certain mechanical bulldozer, a certain sharpened pencil, a certain roll of toilet paper. I'm pretty sure this one was released first, so I went ahead and watched this one. And I thought it had a pretty compelling start. The show lives in a world where everyone has some sort of strange psychic ability, but our main guy was just kind of like, nah, I want to be different. And so his power is to actually negate the abilities of others. But don't worry, he's nothing like Asta. He's actually a pretty chill dude. And then there's Index, who's this girl that people are trying to kill because she has a photographic memory and she saw their browsing history. So they link up and our main guy vows to protect Index using his ability. The start was pretty fun and exciting, but I feel like towards the middle the show kinda lost me. With the introduction of characters that are genuinely so cliched that parodies of that cliche are cliched now. Like for instance, the Tsundere girl, who is a character that I literally summed up with one adjective. She's like the final form of the Tsundere. But this show is pretty chill. It gives off like low-key shonen vibes, and if that premise sounded good to you, then maybe you should give it a shot. Kiss Niver has heart. It's truly an anime that the creators and definitely the studio behind it, Trigger, were passionate about. But I feel like it was all a little forced. So the anime takes place, I guess, sometime in the future, and our main guy is a dude who literally has no emotion and doesn't feel pain. And this is where I kind of start to lose my suspension of disbelief. I mean, look, I love stoic characters who low-key don't give a fuck, but at the end of the day, characters like Guts do have emotions, violent and aggressive whirlwinds of expression. It's what makes them three-dimensional. Number one, this guy is boring. Number two, it's not even the fact that he's locking his emotions away like a real man should. He literally doesn't have any emotion. So the plot of this comes into play when this woman gathers 7 high schoolers and forces them to participate in games that force them to understand each other. This is where I get to where I think the concept is kind of forced. I get what they're trying to set up, but it kind of just feels like a character development simulator. And that's actually kind of funny to say out loud because that sounds like a good thing, but it's sort of like God of High School. What God of High School wanted to do well were its fights. So then it crafted its entire universe around the show's fights. And the show sucked because it didn't have any nuance. Kiss Niver is like that to me, but in a less egregious way. That's my take on the show. I understand why people like it. Look, I'm not much of a crier, and I'm not even just saying that to be like, oh, look at how masculine I am. It's just kind of a fact. The only piece of media to ever make me cry was Uyasumi Punpun. and that's a special case. It's just kind of built different compared to a lot of these shows that I feel like were just crafted with the singular purpose to make you cry. And for most of these anime, it's so obvious. Like, how many times can you fall for the girl with terminal illness bit? But I find most of these shows very cheap, with a couple exceptions like Your Lie in April and A Silent Voice. Since in my completely uninformed opinion, I feel like the objective from the get-go shouldn't be to make the audience cry. Plastic Memory immediately gave me cheap crybait vibes, because it's about, imagine a story where the main character works for a company that has to put down dogs, and the main heroine is a dog herself that has a terminal illness. That's basically this show, but trade dogs with robots. I could literally predict the ending of this show from 5 minutes and 37 seconds into the first episode. But all of this is not necessarily a deal breaker. I did enjoy my time with the show from what I watched, but I didn't cry or anything like that. Ninja Kamui is a good anime. For the first couple of episodes, from frame 1, I could just sense that the atmosphere, the stunning fight choreography, the soundtrack, and honestly just the show's sense of style was setting up for an easy hidden gem buried in the 60 anime per season that we've been getting lately. Sure, there were always visible cracks within the first few episodes of the show, with some inconsistencies in writing, but that didn't really matter to me. Because at the end of the day, this was just a dumb revenge plot with futuristic ninja and Mark Zuckerberg all trying to kill each other. But then... the falloff of Ninja Kamui needs to be studied. I actually heard about the falloff from other people before even watching it. And I think the real reason the CGI was so jarring in the show is because the 2D fight scenes in the earlier episodes pretty much became the show's identity. It's what the show was known for. But then when you abruptly take that away, suddenly all the other defects of the shows become glaringly obvious. Nail me to the cross for saying this, but Ninja Kamui doesn't have a CGI problem. It has a Ninja Kamui problem. Guys, we officially made it out of the trenches. These are all of the shows that I'd actively recommend, but keep in mind that there are still 2 entire tiers above this next one. So sit back, maybe pick up a few recommendations, but also remember that it's only gonna get better from here. Let's go back to that Gundam store real quick. I've never really been that big of a fan of the franchise, but doing this video made me realize something. Gundam is cool as shit. The Witch from Mercury is the first Gundam anime on this list, and it's also one out of about 50,000 Gundam anime. So I didn't want to have to catch up on 5 decades of history and lore to be able to do this video, so for right now, I decided to only watch some of the higher rated standalone Gundam shows that you don't really need any larger context to understand. Witch from Mercury is a relatively recent one, and it's a mecha show, obviously, but it never really feels like mecha is its entire identity. Let me explain. It takes place in this private academy where only sons and daughters of successful company CEOs can attend. Basically a rich kid private school. But one of the cool things they got going is that whenever a disagreement happens between 2 students, it could be settled with a duel between their company's mechas. And the show mostly isn't even about, oh, big robots do big shooty things so we can sell our Gundam merch. With the students representing some of the biggest corporations in the galaxy, most of the conflict in the show is purely political. There's also lesbians in the show. Watching Trigun Stampede truly opened my eyes to how much anime fans despise CGI. Like, it's not a rational hatred at this point. Saying an anime has CGI nowadays is tantamount to saying that Satan himself infiltrated the production cycle to personally give it the mark of the beast. It's just pure discrimination at this point, because people don't even distinguish between good CGI and god-awful CGI. Don't get me wrong, I love shitting on terrible CGI, it's my favorite pastime. But like, Land of the Lustrous exists, Beastars exist, and the same studio behind both of those are responsible for Trigun Stampede. So Trigun Stampede is like an original anime spin-off of the original Trigun, but I actually like this one way better. That might be a hot take, but hey, I really don't think the original aged all that well. So similar to the original, the show is a Western-inspired sci-fi that features Vash, a nomad gunslinger with a mechanical arm, and a duo of reporters that came to his desert planet to track Vash down. But it turns out Vash's bounty isn't a result of any of his crimes, but his twin brother's crimes. And for this entire time, he's been trying to track down his brother while roaming village to village. The characters are really fun. I remember in the original, Vash's entire personality was just harassing women and being a menace, but new Vash I like. He's a chill dude. The other characters are cool too. This anime's a fun watch. What if Hajime no Ippo had sex with Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo was watching? Well, my friend, what you get is Megalobox. Megalobox is a prime example of straight shot underdog media. A poor unregistered immigrant boxer with old and flimsy attachments challenges the real world of boxing, which in this world is called megaloboxing. It's essentially the same boxing that the Paul brothers ruined, but the stakes are way higher because the athletes are allowed to wear these metal gears that enhance their blocking and striking abilities. The show is set in this sort of rustic steampunk world where megaloboxing is everything to these characters. They've been all in on the sport for their whole lives. It's kind of comparable when you hear about NBA and American football players' past lives, where a lot of them grew up in places with little opportunity, but they were able to claw their way out of their circumstances by committing their body and soul to basketball, or football, or boxing. You seriously can't help but root for the guy after seeing what he came from and seeing his journey. The action is also sick, of course. All the fights are great. Darker Than Black? What is this, some type of porno? Oh, nope, it's an anime. A pretty good anime, as I would soon find out. The show lives in this bleak world where one day a giant wall just spawned in called Hell's Gate. And along with that, these supernaturals were born called contractors and dolls who each have their own respective set of powers and abilities. Our main character is a lone wolf Sigma male contractor, but what I like about this show is its very unconventional structure. The plot barely actually focuses on the main characters and instead shines light on characters who under normal circumstances would just be in the background. It's cool because we get to view this insane world through the lens of some average, ordinary people for the most part. And we get to see the impact that these supernatural freaks, including our main characters, have on their lives. Technolize is an adult show. It's definitely not for everyone. The pacing is slow and there are depictions of a lot of things that I wouldn't even be able to verbalize on YouTube. Although if you could tolerate all those things, Technolize is this incredibly immersive pitch black cyberpunk story that will always have you guessing and on the edge of your seat. The characters all feel real and urban. They all carry themselves with a serious demeanor. Oftentimes, there's nothing very likable about them. And to be honest, that's my biggest criticism of the show. There is no comedy relief to be found, and it's pretty much just doom and gloom for the entire show. I don't know, I guess I'm the type of dude that needs some sort of comedic break from everything. Otherwise, I think it's a good watch, other than some parts I think are a little dragged out. Gargantia on the Verdurous Planet is another mecha anime, and one thing that this show made me remember was something I said in real life to a friend at some point, and I quote, "The mechs in mecha anime are usually the least interesting part of the show." In episode 1, we're immediately thrusted with this kind of boring mecha save the world type of mission action scene, but then suddenly the main character gets sucked into a wormhole and sent to a place that he has absolutely no knowledge of. And that's why I think this anime is interesting. It's kind of like a what if we dropped a random East Coast American into a native island tribe that speaks a foreign language and has an unfamiliar culture. It'll always be tough, and I think shows like this are cool for depicting stuff like that. Number 6 is this utopian city where there is no poverty, no conflicts, and for the most part, no problems. But of course, that's not true. There's a dark underbelly to the city that the always skeptical Shion started to get curious about, but immediately as he starts expressing suspicion, he gets shut up. Number 6 is a show about the main character duo as they are whisked away to a different reality and find out the true nature of their society after taking the red pill. I really love shows like this. Full Metal Panic doesn't really do anything new, but it easily excels in everything that it does do. Usually when anime do that thing where 50% of the show consists of violent militaristic warfare and carnage, and then the other 50% is a high school rom-com, I cringe, because the shit just does not mix at all. It's easy to tell that the writers manipulated the fabric of their own plot and world just so that this subplot could happen. Although with Full Metal Panic, I was surprised to see how well these two settings could be weaved together, and it works. The characters are fun, the action is a good time, and overall, a good anime. Kaiba has this early mid-70s cartoonish type of aesthetic that I'm sure is the reason most people dropped this show. But I think a lot of people missed out because this is an extremely creative and atypical story about this kind of dystopia where the concept of death isn't really a thing. As long as you have your memories, you could be reborn into another body. It's one of the most abstract and brave stories I've ever seen, and it has one of the most interesting explorations of amnesia. Tiger and Bunny pleasantly surprised me. It's about these people who were randomly gifted with supernatural abilities, and some of them chose to wreak havoc and become cackling cartoon villains, and others chose to become heroes. Show's kinda similar to My Hero Academia in that aspect. But unlike My Hero Academia, every single hero is under contract and is completely bought and paid for by media companies who televise their every action as heroes. So I guess it's kind of like The Boys in that aspect. I like this show. It definitely has more of a comic book vibe to it in the first couple of episodes, but then the plot takes a turn and we start to learn a lot about the world. So here comes another Gundam, and it's Iron-Blooded Orphans. This was actually my first Gundam that I was watching when it was coming out, and it really surprised me. I always thought of Gundam as this archaic franchise that needs 4 decades worth of show knowledge to actually understand and enjoy, but I think the people behind Iron-Blooded Orphans were aware of the sentiment surrounding Gundam and took a more outsider-friendly approach. The show has a pretty well thought out story about child soldiers within the scope of a war that is far above them, and yet they still have the power to forge their own path. The story isn't perfect, it doesn't go above and beyond, but it's solid. It single-handedly made such an intimidating franchise like Gundam seem approachable to me, and I think this show should get a lot of credit for that. Bokurano will ruin you. It's about these 15 kids who are all one day swept up in this game, in air quotes, because this game has them pilot a mech to save Earth from destruction. Although this anime is not your ordinary mecha. Most of the real conflicts comes from within the backstories of whoever is picked to be pilot. As everyone's past is revealed, we start to learn the true reasons for what everyone is actually fighting for. Since sometimes a struggle to save the world takes a side stage to a struggle within oneself. The backstories are all incredibly well told, but some of them can be hard to watch, honestly. So I probably wouldn't recommend this to everyone, but Bokurano has a good story to tell for those who are there for it. A mecha romance show like Eureka 7 had all the ingredients for something that was just not my thing at the time I watched it. But the actual dish it created from those ingredients surprised me in a big way. The show is more than just a mecha show with a whiny main character. It's got depth, mysteries that will have you clicking on the next episode, and pretty well written characters. But there's a big but. This show is old. So old that it has this goofy ass picture size that just sizzles my eyeballs. And a lot of the show suffers from it being a product of its time. For a story like this to have a significant amount of it be comprised of filler is just a major turnoff that really detracts from the experience. Area Lost in Space is something that anyone who has played an open world game will understand. Immediately, we're introduced to all these high schoolers in the year 2063 who are going on a field trip to another planet. But quickly, things go completely in the wrong direction and they all get stranded in space, thousands of light years away from any civilization. And with their limited resources, they travel from planet to planet hoping to find any ways to access civilization. This setup not only leads to a great survival story, but it also leads to some great character writing. It places all these strangers in this extremely perilous situation where they're forced to rely on each other to stay alive. I really enjoyed my time with this one. I'll Noah Zero has a great start and an insane hook. So basically one day, a gate on the moon was discovered which allowed humans to instantly travel to Mars. And those people that did choose to colonize Mars became increasingly distant from Earth and started to think of themselves as their own race. And eventually the generals of Mars declared war on Earth using their giant robots, of course. And I think that the show does a very good job at the start. It does maintain a consistent level of quality, but the structure is pretty much just beat bad Martian guy and then move on to stronger Martian guy. And I like it. It's an above average mecha show, but it's not revolutionary. Promare is a Studio Trigger original. And you know what else is a Studio Trigger original? Only like some of my favorite piece of anime ever. Yeah, so I was hyped to get into it. And it was definitely a Studio Trigger original. It felt a lot like Gurren Lagann. The plot would never stay in one place for long, things would move at an incredible pace, and eventually the show becomes almost unidentifiable to what it originally once was. But Gurren Lagann did this over the course of 24 episodes, and it felt like Promare tried to mirror the same kind of structure in the time frame of, well, a movie. Promare is about a race of humans that come to be because they suddenly started spontaneously combusting. As they begin to be able to control their flames, they basically become the boogeyman to normal humans. Our main character is a firefighter dude who looks and acts oddly similar to a certain submarine. The premise, along with triggering my dopamine receptors with the movie's godly art style, got me really hooked into it. Although the awful pacing, blatant plot holes, and inconsistencies quickly started showing themselves. But who the hell cares in the end? I still had way too much dumb fun with this. It was just sick. Ergo Proxy doesn't hold your hand. It explains to you how to do the quadratic formula and then expects you to know multivariable calculus. At least, that's how it seems on the outside. Yes, Ergo Proxy is not like Demon Slayer. You can't expect to turn your brain off and understand what's going on. But it also isn't Serial Experiments Lane, where it's practically just impossible to tell what's going on at any given moment. This show requires an active viewing to understand it, and even then, you may only comprehend 60% of what's going on. That's really the main thing holding this series back. The complete failure in some situations to equip the viewer with a sufficient understanding of what's going on really hurts the show more than anything. Otherwise, this show has a great story. It lives in this post-apocalyptic world where the outside world is largely uninhabitable, and humanity only thrives within these mechanical enclaves, and each civilian is assisted with personal robots called ROREVs. Although a virus started spreading among the ROREVs that gives them consciousness. And our main character, Riel, is investigating these infected ROREVs. I think this show really shines with its characters, as Vincent, Ryan, and Riel all go on their journeys of self-discovery. I'm not gonna lie, it's actually very unlikely that I've finished Ergo Proxy by the time this video comes out, but that's mainly because I'm saving it for a rainy day. Nothing's better than having a good show saved for whenever you want to finish it. Legend of the Galactic Hero was also a show I was saving for a rainy day. From hearing so much about it, I was always certain that I was going to love it. The show follows the war between the Galactic Empire and Free Planets Alliance, with almost an autistic level of depth and detail. You will know why the war started, who started it, why they started it, and why it matters. This is Star Wars. Lucas should rename his franchise, because if there's any piece of fiction that deserves that name, it's this. Although this anime is over 100 episodes long, and I still probably, by the time this video comes out, will still be on what many people consider the start of the show. And so far, it seems heavily exposition reliant, since there's so much going on in the world, so many details crammed into the show that a lot of it is narrated over. Although this is something that can be fixed with time, but what can't be is that I wasn't a big fan of the animation and generally the art style. To be fair, it came out in 1997, but also to be fair, Cowboy Bebop came out in 1998, and that's one of the most stylistically pleasing shows that rival anime nowadays. So that's no excuse for me. Overall, I haven't finished the show yet, so this is genuinely where I stand on it now. So next up is a pretty interesting one that my anime list tagged as a sci-fi, which is The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. I could definitely see where the classification comes from, but it's not my first thought when I think about this show. So this one's a real throwback. I remember people back in the day couldn't exactly decide how many inches of this show's dick they would or could fit inside their throat. And I like this show too, I'm just not a dick rider. The concept is definitely a winner. If you've ever seen cringy weebs praying to Haruhi Suzumiya, it's because she's literally God in this universe. She's a narcissistic, arrogant high school girl, but it also happens that everything tends to bend to her will unknowingly. Our main protagonist is definitely a winner too, at least to me. I like the dude. He's always down to earth and chill with it. The other characters are cool too. It's just that once we realize what Haruhi's power is and that whole facet is explored, there's not much to the show. The comedy only maybe got me around 50% of the times, and otherwise the show was really just a slice of life with a funky twist to it. I completely understand why people fawn over this show though. I just think it got boring at certain parts. Oh, I did watch the Haruhi movie though, The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. I really liked it. I legitimately forgot about this movie's existence when I was first writing this script, but I genuinely went back and adjusted the ranking just because I liked the movie so much. So Eden of the East really surprised me because the main character is just some dude who has amnesia, and I usually hate when shows or movies do this kind of thing since they're basically reducing their entire character to be a blank slate with absolutely no personality. But then
some passports. Man, there's a lot of them here. Maybe I'm more of a Jason Bourne than Travis Bickle.
The main character makes a Taxi Driver reference? Out of all the moments in anime I've watched for this video, this was the one scene that I genuinely did a double take on. All of his memories were erased except for his vast knowledge of movies. So practically all of his common sense and basic understanding of the world comes from Hollywood movies. I can't foresee anything going wrong with that. And he actually does have a pretty likable personality. The whole story, he's just trying to figure out who in the world his previous self was, and all the insane shit that his past self was up to. And honestly, it's great. I don't want to spoil it though, because a lot of the enjoyment I personally got from the show was solely due to the fact that I went into it blind. Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex is a show that was released 5 years after the classic Ghost in the Shell movie that we all know and love. But I'm not sure if this is a hot take, but I actually enjoyed this series more than I did the movie. So I'm not gonna bother ranking them separately, I'm just gonna go with the show since it's higher anyways. So if you're perceptive, you might have noticed from the title that this show is actually an episodic show. Each episode tells its own standalone story that always ends up contributing in some complex manner to the world building, character relations, or the philosophy of the show. And historically, I've always kind of dogged on episodic stuff with the exceptions of comedies. But this one kinda had me in the same mindset as Cowboy Bebop. The show is largely composed of isolated episodic stories, but no one who likes Cowboy Bebop would unironically tell you to skip episodes and only watch the parts that deal with the overarching story, since the time spent with the crew is really what makes those serious overarching story beats so impactful. The same could be said about Standalone Complex. There's a whole list of episodes featuring the main plot that you could find online, and there was even a movie release that cut out everything except the plot episodes. Yet I still feel like the best way to consume it is through just watching the show. So much character development and world building is lost through cutting out these episodes. Space Dandy is a show that by all means should not work for me. It breaks the fourth wall more times than politicians break promises. The biggest joke of the show isn't the comedy, but this man's haircut, and the show is aggressively horny. Like to the point where our main character's favorite place to eat is an establishment called Boobies. Yeah, but somehow when Space Dandy combined all that corny shit, it turned out to be one of the funnest anime I've ever watched. Not because of the character writing or plot. Actually, I feel like this show and plot are like oil and water. Shit doesn't mix. The plot of Space Dandy, in air quotes, is entirely dependent on the whims of this horny space delinquent. One day he might get tired of instant ramen and then travel through extra dimensional wormholes to find ramen better than instant. Another day he might just be horny and spend the day at Boobies. You will watch Space Dandy and you might like it or you might hate it. But one thing that's for certain is that you've never seen anime like this. It definitely looks like anime, but it doesn't feel like anime. It vaguely reminded me of a certain show, and after a Google search, I was surprised to see that this was an anime original created by the same guy behind Cowboy Bebop. And when I say that, there's a lot of expectations that come with it. I didn't know this information going into Space Dandy, and I went in and just had fun. But I think a lot of people go into the show, think it'll be like the Cowboy Bebop of the 2010s, and then the show's ruined for them. So if you go into this, do yourself a favor and dive into it with an open mind. Hey everyone, it's me. I have a confession to make. I do not like moe, or, for matter of fact, slice of life. Those genres are like Olympic athletes to me. Slice of life is like Usain Bolt, and moe is like Noah Lyles. Because they're both gold medalists, and how freakishly fast these shows will put me to sleep. Like, it's actually impressive how well these shows function as a sort of tranquilizer. But the most confusing thing of all is that I actually enjoyed Girls Last Tour, an anime that did the unholy fusion dance between both of these genres. So what's special about this show? It's certainly not the first to feature a post-apocalyptic scenario for its setting, but it's the first to handle it in such a lighthearted, almost whimsical manner. We could visually see the decaying backdrop of what was once a society, the faint, almost distant traces of a culture, all in the background, with the foreground being focused on these scatterbrained, silly, almost moronic two girls that just roam this earth in the sad state that it's in and just trying to survive. There's almost an eerie feeling I get when watching these girls interact in this optimistic, borderline cheerful manner when their situation is probably the most hopeless scenario I could possibly imagine. And there's also a lot of mystery when it comes to this show. Like, what actually happened to cause so much destruction and a complete lack of human life other than them? Girls Last Tour was a pleasant surprise, and it's something that I don't regret watching. For most of the shows on this list so far, they've explored these wild depictions of futuristic cyberpunk worlds or utopian societies. But Shinsekai Yuri takes a leap back from all of that. The setting is this unsettlingly quaint village where everyone who lives there wields some sort of psychic ability. Children are sent off to basically the equivalent of grade school, where they are educated in hopes that they'll unlock their psychic ability. Saki realized her powers relatively late compared to the others, and once she did, she immediately graduated basically to the equivalent of high school. Although, it's very strange. Her parents were relieved when she got her powers, almost to the point where it begs the uncanny question, question of what happens if she didn't awaken her powers. The story follows Saki and her group of friends in high school, and we ultimately followed their journey through unraveling the possibly vile history of the society they're living in. This might be one of my favorite types of stories, where we're dropped into this world with no exposition, and we're forced to use our own brains to truly piece together the mysterious nature of the world we're just dropped into. I think Shinsekai Yuri is this type of show done really well, and I had a great time with it. This show is like, I'm trying to find a way to put this that isn't edgy. Okay, whatever. It's like if Nazi ideology became meta, and instead of the Aryan race having blonde hair and blue eyes, they have blue hair and blue eyes. The story is told from the perspective of a completely homogenous nation where everyone pretty much looks the same. And as you could probably imagine, this is a paradise for anyone living in Alabama. Not because they're neo-Nazis or anything, but because everyone looks like a blood relative. So the country is currently in a war that media pundits boast about having 0 casualties because it's fought using automatic robots, but that is just a straight up lie. There are people piloting these supposed automatic robots, but they're non-Aryans, meaning they don't officially count as casualties. That's actually pretty fucked up. So our main character is a major in the military who fought besides what they call the 86, which are basically the minorities. She has a soft spot for the 86 that she shares with basically nobody. The propaganda runs deep within this nation, and it leaves everyone believing that they're unevolved, legitimately inferior creatures who are lucky to be under the Empire's rule. Under her experience working with a new infamous crew of 86, she gains a new perspective on a lot of things. And I thought this was a great show that covered unfortunately relevant topics that we see today, like discrimination, brainwashing, and alienation. The cast of characters, especially the team of 86, I thought was incredibly strong. And that's the end of that tier. All that we have next are the last 2 extremely exclusive tiers. Honestly, I can't even wait any longer. I just want to talk about these next special shows that I thought were just fucking amazing. Getting into Carol and Tuesday was a lot like getting into macaroni and cheese. You don't look at a nice homemade dish of mac and cheese with the expectation that it's gonna be dog shit. You know for certain from everything you've seen about it that this is gonna bang. This show belongs to that genre of anime I've recently started liking where the main character leaves everything behind to pursue their passion. It's made by the same imminent god himself, Shinichiro Watanabe, the person also behind Cowboy Bebop and a bunch of other amazing shit. And also, the show just genuinely looks beautiful. So there was just 0 chance that I wasn't gonna mess with this. And the show surprised me in more ways than one. I feel like describing the plot of this show to people is just impossible. Because would you believe me if I told you that this show is about the equivalent of Baron Trump abandoning his support for his father's campaign to start an interracial pop duet band with an illegal immigrant? No? You don't believe me? Well, I guess you're just gonna have to watch it. But if you're still not convinced and the premise doesn't sound attractive to you, I get it. Not all of us are into music, but I hope that we've all had passions and dreams before, since that's really the only requirement to get hopelessly attached to the main characters. Carol and Tuesday make a phenomenal pair. Both of them have lovable personalities and style, and they absolutely tear it up in the music department. Obviously, I don't want to risk triggering any YouTube's copyright system, but trust me when I say that seriously, the soundtrack of this anime is probably the most high budget and high production I've ever witnessed. It's to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if I saw half of this soundtrack straight up just placed on the Hot 100. They quite literally have songs that range from straight up Skrillex all the way to The Weeknd, and they're all in English too. Watanabe is an insane man. He's just crazy. I don't know how he does this shit. So the show takes place on Mars, where Carol and Tuesday dream to one day make it big in an industry where almost 99% of songs are AI generative. And while a lot of people call this show futuristic and science fiction, I personally call this next month. By the halfway point of the show, Carol and Tuesday pretty much get their breakthrough in the industry, and this is also where the show takes a dramatic change in terms of tone. To put it kind of bluntly, it becomes political. And listen, I've seen The Boys, so I know how disastrous this could turn out in practice. But I almost didn't mind it when it came to Carole & Tuesday. Problems with this stuff usually emerge when the politics feels too forced or shoehorned in, and this show does neither of those things. I know some people will disagree with me, but either way, this show is not perfect by any means, but it's also something I thoroughly enjoyed, and I love everything that this man creates. There truly isn't a way I could fully capture the adrenaline rush to be had from watching Redline. Oh wait. There is one way. Gurren Lagann, that's the only possible way I could even begin to describe the sheer epicness of this anime. When it comes to the plot of Redline, it's short, sweet, and straight to the point. Every 5 years, the biggest racing tournament across the cosmos is held called Redline. The only rule, there are no rules. Our main character is a dude who qualifies for Redline, and that's all you need to know about this movie to enjoy it. When it comes to the visual presentation of Redline, words fail me. This is Studio Madhouse with a Disney budget. I don't know where the hell they got the funding for this movie, but it is one of the most visually stunning animations I've ever seen, period. Redline is all about the visual experience. There's a diverse range of character designs from humans all the way to whatever this is. The movie is such a creative spectacle that will have you either with your jaw on the floor, laughing, or crying. It was really surprising to see a story with such a minimal plot have moments that will just hit you like a fucking truck and send your ass to another world. But Redline achieved that while also having some of the most hype and beautiful scenes I've ever witnessed in anime. Prison is a terrible place to be. Locked up for years on end while watching your life pass you by, all because you smoked weed once as a 16-year-old. And then you have to put up with your cellmates that consist of 3 genuine supervillains and a Boondocks character. Anyways, Pluto is also in jail. Netflix jail, to be more precise. And this show needs your help. You could help by watching it. It's great. Don't worry. Whatever methods you may use to get there, your secret's safe from me. Pluto is about a society many years in the future where robots have become so human that they've started to get their own rights. Yeah, that's right. Calling them claggers is now a racial slur tantamount to hate speech. I might even get cancelled for saying it. Who knows? The story focuses on Jessich, a robot detective who's tasked with investigating a string of murders, all with the victims being important robot figureheads. But as he digs deeper and deeper, the assailant starts getting more and more mysterious, almost to the point where the killer seems less like a physical entity and more like a metaphorical divine smite exacted on these victims for one reason or another. There are so many moving parts to this show, whether it be with the characters and their backstories or the many layers of mystery this show has until it's all revealed at the end. Parasite is an extremely classic manga that came out in the 80s, and the only relevant and highly acclaimed adaptation to this is Parasite Part 1, as we all know. Okay, obviously this is a joke, but honestly now that I've seen CGI Migi, I could die without any regrets. But the real adaptation I'm obviously referring to is Parasite the Maxim, and Studio Madhouse locked in for this one. Do you know about that trend we've been seeing in anime for a while now, especially in shonen, but not limited to it, where the main character ends up as some sort of hybrid human of whatever monster they're fighting against? So for example, in Kaiju number 8, the main protagonist gets turned into a half kaiju, half human mutation. You could trace this trope back all the way to the Parasite manga. It was the first to do this kind of trope successfully. It's about a boy that gets his insides ravaged by an alien, and this kid's not a freak, so he doesn't really vibe with what's going on, but the alien ultimately fuses with the boy's body, and they each have to learn how to live with a biologically and instinctually different organism while also staving off other aliens. I think that Parasite is probably one of, if not the best hybrid show out there, with the dynamic between Migi and Shinichi being incredibly fleshed out. And I love how instead of just using the hybrid plotline as a way to make an OP protagonist, the show also takes this set of circumstances to explore deeper themes, like what it means to be human. I really appreciated this show when I watched it. It feels weird walking out of Vivi with such a high opinion of it. Because honest to God, if the show wasn't so damn beautiful, I probably would have dropped it early on. But with this show, the stunning production and art direction only serves to draw the audience in. But what makes us stay is the show's exceptional writing and characters. Vivi's Fluorite Eye is about this cute autistic robot girl whose only purpose in life is to sing and make people happy. But then her whole existence gets flipped on its head when she's given the mission to travel back in time and stop her fellow androids from genociding the human race. And the reason she's been picked to do this is because she's quite literally built different. No, actually she has this robot teddy bear sidekick guy that can quite literally hack into anything if he could get plugged into it. And overall, this is a plot that can either be really, really good or really, really bad. And thankfully, we live in the good timeline. If I need to do any more convincing, this was written by the same guy responsible for ReZero, and it was produced by the same people behind Attack on Titan, Season 1. So lock in, everyone. Psycho-Pass is a classic, and if you haven't watched it, please do. Y'all have slept on this show for long enough, but hold up, let me sell it to you. This show lives in this insane dystopia where everyone lives under the Sybil system, which is this preposterously complex algorithm that attempts to calculate a civilian's bad intentions and puts it into numerical form. The Psycho-Pass is a person's quantified criminality, and if it's over a certain threshold, law enforcement are goaded into killing on sight. Akane is a new police officer who, much like everyone else, has a rigid sense of justice. The philosophy of this world might seem fucked up to us, but everyone in this verse has been indoctrinated into thinking that the Sybil system is absolute, that good and bad are as simple as black and white. But it takes one single mission to go tragically in the wrong direction for Akane to start doubting the authority of the Sybil system. The first time I knew I was watching peak was when the main villain first gets introduced. He is cold. He's like Johan, but like a sci-fi version. The whole reason why he's such a scary villain is that the Sybil system can't read his intentions. He's a complete and utter mystery, even to the Psycho-Pass. And as Akane and every other character face off against this monster, they progressively grow more and more suspicious of the Sybil system. He's a villain whose motives are unclear the entire show, but he drags the entire cast through a wild goose chase where at the end, his motives become understood by all. I did hear that this got a season 2, but I heard it is trash, so I never really bothered with it. First season left me satisfied, to be honest. Okay, I want to start this out with an anecdote. I attend an American university, an engineering student. I have tough homework. If you've ever complained about your homework before, I'm just gonna say it straight, even if your homework took a Viagra, mine would still be 10 times harder. So a lot, and I mean a lot of people around me cheat themselves by using whatever AI. And then whenever I actually do an assignment legitimately, it's kind of like that one image of that guy in the swimming pool in clean water while everyone else pissed themselves. Serial Experiments Lane means a lot of things to a lot of people. It's a classic, and one of the most impressive things about this is how it meant something very different 2 decades ago to now. Lane was a very important anime for its time. It warned about the potential dangers of digitalization, and it outright predicted concepts like digital personas and VR chat. But now, in a society practically engulfed by the very thing this show was trying to warn us about, everything is recontextualized. It's like the show got a new wrapping. Generative AI, self-driving cars. Oh, what was that? Kai Cenat had a Tesla robot on stream and it threw up gang signs? Alright, cool. And I'm sure some other wild shit will happen while I'm editing this video. Humanity is quickly getting closer and closer to fully letting go of the steering wheel, literally and figuratively, to completely relying on technology on a daily basis. It's frightening, and Serial Experiments Lane is like an outlet for that fear. It's this visceral, convoluted entanglement of different characters with motives we don't understand. even down to the main character. But we don't have to understand it, because we know that this is wrong, that something is off. The characters feel less and less human as the show goes on. Lane becomes swept up in their online persona, and suddenly reality becomes subjective and other people become nothing more than NPCs. Overall, this show is a classic that aged like fine wine, and the opening is still top 5. This isn't anime. This is art. Fooly Cooly is as close to a piece of literature as you're ever going to get with an anime series. I hated, and I mean hated, Fooly Cooly the first time I watched it. I seriously don't know how I can communicate the violent rage this show filled me with. I just didn't really mess with it at the time. It kind of just felt like things were just happening with no rhyme or reason. But what really made me hate the show was hearing this phrase: "You just don't get it." This traumatic sequence of words sent me through a frenzy, an irrational spiral of torment and anguish that would only end today. Since I finally gave this show another shot, and I loved it. Maybe it was an age thing, since at the time I didn't really understand any of the subtle shit that this anime was going for, and even some of the non-subtle shit. But I think now I get it. Fooly Cooly is something I've never seen before. The narrative is this fast-paced, almost absent-minded fever dream that recalls the unbelievable memories of Naota's adolescence as he meets Haruko, the first woman who's ever seen him in a sexual way, but who's also impossible as a romantic partner since she's way older. In other words, she's the exact type of fantasy girl a boy his age would dream up. Someone who's too good to be true. Someone who might as well be an alien. Well, actually, she is an alien. I guess that was kind of on the nose. But Fooly Cooly is an easily misunderstood piece of fiction because it's an extremely indecisive show in many ways. Like, it can't decide whether it wants to be a manga or an anime, or if it wants to be South Park or not, or if it's really living up to your interpretation of the show. You might walk out of the first few episodes with your own feelings on what the show is really about, but then you see a scene like this.
Who are you really?
I'm an illusion of your youth, a manifestation of the feelings in your adolescent heart.
Where'd you get that line?
And it feels like the show is just looking at you and just saying, you're fucking stupid. But what I think this scene is really trying to communicate to us is that there is no one true interpretation of Fooly Cooly. It's whatever you make of it. Definitely not a show for everyone, but one thing that is for sure is that this show is kryptonite for video essayists. Oh yeah, also this anime has like one of the greatest anime soundtracks of all time. I'm not even joking, and I'm not even the biggest fan of alternative rock, but I have to admit, it slaps. And then we start to talk about the most important 90 minutes in the history of anime, Akira. In the 1980s, anime was still kind of finding itself. Nowadays, you could randomize works created by Production IG, and whichever one it lands on, you could easily identify it as anime, because, well, it just feels like anime. For the past couple of decades, anime studios learned how to pander to anime fans, which is how I could easily say that this is an anime and this isn't. But back 4 decades ago, studios were way less worried about appealing to a certain audience and more focused on just creating the stuff that they wanted to create. Wicked City is something I hopefully will never watch, but I know enough about it to say that it can never come out today. And the same could also be said about Akira. From the collaboration of 7 different studios, Akira's existence is truly a mystery. It has almost 2 times the frame rate of the average anime at the time, which allowed it to stand visually at the same level as the likes of Walt Disney. It was directed by the same guy who wrote the manga, Akira, which is just downright strange. Like, I genuinely can't think of any other example where this happened. And the movie is set in Neo-Tokyo, which is this futuristic cyberpunk dystopia that was meant to be a replacement to the actual Tokyo, which was blown up. A lot of people suspect that, much like a lot of Japanese media around the same time, that this was a piece of fiction that came about from coping with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which makes sense. Our main characters, Kaneda and Tetsuo, both lost their parents during the destruction of the original Tokyo, which explains their delinquent behavior and the reason they're a part of a dangerous law-breaking biker gang. It's only when Tetsuo discovers his latent psychic ability that he truly begins to wreak havoc. This movie was truly a great watch, and honestly one of my favorite aspects of it was just how stylized everything was. I've had this Akira poster hanging up in my room for the past year, and it's honestly the coolest poster art to ever poster art. You guys know what time it is, right? It's time for the definitive GOATs of the genre. But first, if you made it this far into the video, you already know what I'm gonna say. Maybe consider subscribing, just a suggestion. Also, I have a Patreon for people that want to earn my eternal gratitude and respect for paying my tuition. Okay, no more stalling, here we go. You know those things that just combine the best of both worlds? Things you truly can't hate, like mixed babies. Everyone loves mixed babies. Cowboy Bebop combined jazz, science fiction, action, and a main character who low-key doesn't give a fuck, all into one show. When I was 14 watching this, I could swear on my mama with God as my witness that I just witnessed the height of media. The climax of fiction, the vertex of invention, something of impeccable perfection and too exquisite to exist. It was only after a little reflection that I was actually just describing my teenage opinion of Faye Valentine. So in all seriousness, this show has aged like fine wine. And to be completely honest, saying that you like Cowboy Bebop in the year of our Lord 2025 is like saying that you like the fact that you haven't been hit with an atomic bomb. As an anime fan, it's such an obvious opinion to have that you might as well just not say it. It's kind of wild actually, because I have a history of hating when shows do that episodic shit where the story would basically reset after the episode ends. But this show actually utilizes its episodic nature to its advantage. Since Spike is such an unconventional protagonist, he's less of a hero type of archetype and more of a vagabond, a drifter that just ends up in places and goes wherever the wind takes him. And it just so happens that the wind takes him to some of the most iconic places where he meets some of the most iconic characters, who are some of the most fun and entertaining bunch I've ever seen in the main cast. These guys could be sitting in a room jerking off for the entire episode and I'll still be thoroughly entertained, because they all just have great chemistry together. The action is crazy good. Characters be using anything in their environment to their advantage. Like, God forbid you put a coffee machine within a 4-mile radius of a Cowboy Bebop character. It's pretty much just clips at that point. And if you leave a mop next to one of them, you might just damn well get the best fight scene in the entire franchise. I love the original show, but the movie was something else. 10 out of 10. If you've seen the original but not the movie, please watch this thing. It's amazing. Anyways, Spike is genuinely one of my favorite protagonists out there. Like, this guy is cool, but he's also one-dimensional. Who's just nonchalant for their entire existence. Spike is a chill dude, but it always seemed like that wasn't the full picture. It always seemed like he was running from someone or something. As it turned out, like it frequently does, he has been running away from his past, and by the end, he's finally forced to confront it. This show is absolutely fucking mental. I don't think I've ever seen a sci-fi show quite like this. And my immediate thought was that it had to be the title. I've been referring to this genre a lot, cyberpunk. But what does it actually mean and where does it come from? Well, take a look at Cyberpunk Edgerunners actually tells us a surprising amount about the genre as a whole. As you might already know, this is supposed to be a loose adaptation of Cyberpunk 2077, the game. But that game was actually heavily inspired by Cyberpunk, the TTRPG from 1998. And keep that date in mind because it's important. This swell-looking guy named Mike Pondsmith was the man behind the TTRPG. And by the way, all a TTRPG is a tabletop role-playing game. If you're still not familiar, just think Dungeons and Dragons. But anyways, Mike Pondsmith originally decided to organize all his ideas in the form of a TTRPG because back in 1998, the type of media that he would have wanted to channel his concepts into weren't advanced enough. But that's actually kind of funny because Akira also came out in 1988, which is probably the most famous cyberpunk thing to ever release. It served to be physical and visual proof that this genre could be realized in something other than a TTRPG, or in the form of what started the cyberpunk genre, a novel. a novel that goes by the name of Neuromancer, a book that is largely credited as being the progenitor of the cyberpunk genre. At this point in 1984, a large majority of sci-fi works depict their futuristic worlds as essentially a utopia, or a straight-shot dystopia. And this is exactly why Neuromancer and the genre it would soon create would be so unthinkable. It established cyberpunk as being a more pessimistic, realist take on sci-fi. Cyberscapes tend to border on outright dystopias and are largely characterized by low-life high-tech. The genre takes concepts like accelerated advancements in things like AI and cyberware, and then it smashes that together with societal dysfunction and poverty. And I think that's why this subgenre of sci-fi feels way more realistic to people, because it serves as a rejection that a perfect society or a perfectly imperfect society could ever exist. And this is why I think cyberpunk edgerunners immediately captured its audience. From frame one, we're introduced to this degenerate, gruesome world where deaths happen abruptly and where people inevitably lose themselves. This is Night City. The story follows David, who quickly strays from the path that his recently deceased mom set out for him. With the revelation that his body has a great affinity to cyberware, he becomes an edgerunner, which are basically hired militiamen who complete jobs whenever it's given to them. And it's really an unforgiving profession. One of the edgerunners literally gets his fade run over by some homeless dude pissing. But that doesn't bother David, because in his own words,
I'm built different.
So as this show goes on and we see David equip himself with more and more cyberware, we start to see his limits. You see, in this world, people who are consumed by the excessive cyberware they implant in themselves become what's known as a cyber psycho, and they usually go on killing rampages. David, in his hubris, thinks that he's immune to that sort of fate. But why? Just because he's the main character? That'd be like me picking up League of Legends and thinking I won't gain 300 pounds just because I've been skinny my entire life. Things just don't work that way. In many ways, cyberpunk edgerunners doesn't feel like anime. The main character actually gets with the girl in episode 3, the show somehow presents nudity in a way that doesn't feel like fan service, and the show overall just has this unfiltered, fast-paced, almost psychedelic style of storytelling. And I think that's part of the reason I love this show to death. It's not pandering to any audience like so many anime nowadays do, it's just being itself. Studio Trigger could literally burn my house down, steal everything I own and my cat, and I would still forgive them. Because they cooked so hard with this adaptation, everything down to the art style, the raw animation, and also the cinematography, they did perfectly. The score on this show is just absolutely perfect. Listen, I'm not even a big fan of heavy metal or even regular metal, but the tracks on this show just fit one-to-one with its vibe. From a production standpoint, Edgerunners is honestly a 10 out of 10. Everything else is a 9 out of 10, with my only criticism being that it feels a little bit too fast-paced in certain parts. This is a show that has always been very close to me. Lelouch was genuinely my brother's entire personality until, you guessed it, he discovered One Piece. Send him prayers, he's been hospitalized ever since the hiatus was announced. So this show has famously been called Death Note but mecha, which before I knew anything about this show, I'd always interpret as Death Note but worse. But similar to a lot of statements that anime fans make, this was grossly reductive and also just kind of wrong. The main similarity that people obviously see between the two shows is that Lelouch represents a morally gray smart guy who seeks to make change in the world. Similar to Code Geass, we see Light Yagami get closer to his goal through utilizing his sheer wit. And much like in Death Note, we see Lelouch stage, play, and get ensnared in these ultra twisted mind games that will have the audience always questioning who has the true upper hand in any given situation. But even after having said all of that, this comparison really just boils down to smart people doing smart things to reach a goal, which is about as vague of a relationship to draw as like astrology signs. So one thing that I absolutely will always love whenever a show does is letting the story follow two characters on completely perpendicular paths. Lelouch and Suzuku are childhood friends that both want change, but they go about it in completely different ways. The Holy Empire of Britannia is like like a what if the British actually squashed any attempts at a revolution in the Americas. And while we may know that as the worst timeline, for everyone in the verse, it's reality. And Britannia is basically your stereotypical big bad evil regime, but it has that British monarchy aesthetic. Suzuku, a Japanese refugee, joined the Knights of the Round in order to get closer to the ruling class. Lelouch, the 17th prince, wants to tear it all down, and he uses his 9th level spell called Gias to attempt to overthrow the government. The way this power is utilized is so interesting. Basically, it's the power to control the actions of anyone he sees, and you can probably just imagine all the wild and creative ways this power could be weaved into the plot. Okay, one major criticism I do have to give for the show is how Gias is a lot of the time used as a brainless scapegoat for impossible situations. The most obvious and almost show-ruining example that I'm sure nobody is surprised I'm pointing out is...
For example, if I told you to kill all the Japanese, it wouldn't matter how you felt about it.
This is some Looney Tunes level writing that a lot of the time people acknowledge as being shit, but ignore it because they like the rest of the show. But to give context, basically it's the end of season 1. Virtually all the conflicts have been resolved, all the loose ends have been addressed, and a satisfying resolution was about to be reached, since one of the princesses of Britannia was about to make peace with Lelouch. But then, that shit happens. The writers genuinely backed themselves into a corner because of how neatly they were about to wrap things up for season 1, but then I guess they were just reminded of the fact that they had to make a season 2 and just pulled something directly out of their assholes. But here's the thing, Code Geass has one hell of a redemption arc. Season 2 is good. It's great. It's everything season 1 was, but better. But where the show really redeemed itself was the actual ending of the series, which is hands down the single best ending that an anime has ever gotten. I mean, I'm trying to think of some right now, but I honestly can't. Most anime don't even have endings at all. Good endings is even rarer. So that's why Code Geass will always be a classic. This shit is the shit. This shit was shitting before farts were even invented. This shit is Gurren Lagann. This anime turns boys into men. This show truly opens your third eye. You didn't think something this epic could exist, and you weren't expecting it either, but Gurren Lagann is just about the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's just about a mole kid and his flashy brother who dream of reaching the top of the world. This is a show that completely won over its audience, not by having amazing writing or a great plot, but it won us over with its heart. This show takes your ideas and your expectations just to say, fuck all that. The only idea that actually matters is feeling and spirit. This show speaks to you on an emotional level. It talks to your willpower, that adrenaline rush that overcomes you as you resolve to beat an impossible challenge. And it tells you to resolve harder, because nothing is truly impossible in this world. And as long as you live, you could forge your own destiny. The power of friendship is something I would, under normal circumstances, shit on anime for doing. When characters are clearly going to lose a fight, the outcome has basically been decided, and then boom. Flashback that rouses the audience's sympathy for the main cast of characters, and then they all get bullshit power-ups. So here's the main difference when Gurren Lagann does it. This show just does it cooler. I was genuinely trying to think of a justification for why I love it when Gurren Lagann does it versus when, say, Fairy Tail does it. But I think maybe the answer just comes down to the fact that it was already established that this show was basically just written based on vibes. The power of bros and friendship was etched into the core of the show from the very beginning. So you're not expecting some Game of Thrones level writing. Instead, you expect to see dudes who, under normal circumstances, have no right to dream, surpass every limitation and reach for the stars. And I just love this show for that. Medium well steak is the only way to eat steak. Steins Gate is good. These two statements are virtually the same, uncontroversial and correct. I don't really know what I can say about this classic that hasn't been said already. It's one of my personal favorite productions I've ever seen in anime. Some of the shots in this show just go hard. There's no other way to describe it. The last 12 episodes of this anime are the best 12 episodes in anime. Okay, maybe that's a stretch. X-Arm does exist. So Steins Gate is famous for being that one anime with the 3-episode rule just straight up does not work. You need way more context, way more time to get familiar with the cast of characters, and way more setup to prepare for the sheer roller coaster of the second half of this anime. Really, the only way I could describe Steins Gate is by comparing it to a ride at Disney World. Alright, hear me out for a second. Space Mountain easily solos every other coaster in that whole theme park, but that's besides the point. The entire branding of the ride is centered upon the fact that you can't really see anything. You're completely shrouded in darkness for its entire duration, and you can't even see the track ahead of you. The first part of the ride consists of movement, and you know it's moving, but you don't know in what direction, left or right, even up or down. It leaves you anxious. Until it drops you and you suddenly realize the direction you're going the entire time. Similarly, Steins Gate always has this layer of obscurity to its narrative. Even as the ride starts to accelerate, we're still left in the dark about a lot of things. That is, until the ride ends, we get off, and we're able to see the show clearly for what it is. There are many things I absolutely love about this show. The intriguing mysteries that were brilliantly foreshadowed, how it somehow retains a cohesive plot while dealing with such a complex idea, and I know I already glazed it, but the entire production is just impeccable. And also, this is one of the rare shows that genuinely might be as fulfilling rewatching than watching it for the first time. It is inevitable that a disgusting amount of details will go unnoticed throughout your first watch, and going back and picking up on all of them is so satisfying. I won't actually go into the specifics of anything with this show because it's really easy to spoil, so just watch it. It's great. Seven years ago, Made in Abyss Season 1 was released, and it lied to all of us. We were promised an adventure, one that we could all sit down, watch, and let ourselves be immersed in this mystical otherworldly descension into paradise. But the only thing waiting for them in this paradise was... To be completely forthright, I've never been more confused by a piece of media. What was the author trying to do? Is there actually a purpose behind showing all of these scenes that are just hard to watch? And most importantly, where the hell is this show going and what exactly is it trying to convey? My first thought was that it was all merely shock value, but that didn't feel right at all. Something about these moments in the show as a whole doesn't feel cheap. These depictions feel less edgy and more raw. It's almost as if from the start, this story was trying to intentionally lure us into this false sense of security, showing us these beautiful landscapes, enchanting us with its mystical soundtrack, and introducing us to a cast of whimsical childlike characters was all a part of this deception. Once the veil was lifted though, we saw this show for what it truly was. But why did it end up taking this shape? Well, I wouldn't actually find the answer to that until today, because 7 years is a long time, so I don't really remember this show all too well. I went ahead and rewatched the entire show and took this opportunity to finally get around to watching the movie in season 2. And both of these were fucking traumatic. Made in Abyss is one of the most controversial anime ever. Period. You either love it, hate it, don't want to remember it, or think everyone who watches it should be sent straight to hell because it's lolicon. The last one is very important, obviously. I hear this most often from people who've read the manga because it's apparently way worse there, but the anime for the most part is a faithful adaptation. And look, I won't defend it. Made in Abyss is a show I've never recommended to anyone, and it's something I probably never will. It's not lollybait in my opinion, but even if I were to give it the full benefit of the doubt, this show would have been way better if certain things just didn't happen or if certain panels just weren't drawn. Otherwise, this anime delivers one of the most potent storytelling experiences I've ever witnessed in an anime. Let me explain. Why is every layer of the Abyss more and more terrifying, yet they're forced to keep descending anyways since they can't climb back up? Why are all the monsters in reality 20 times more horrifying than any book could have ever described? And why does every single child character we meet in this show always turn out to be tragically exploited and used in some way by the adults of the Abyss? Well, let me use Santa Claus as an example. Trust me, this is going somewhere. Santa Claus is not real. The first time you've heard someone say this to your face, you were probably in shock, maybe a little bit in denial too. But more importantly, it felt like your whole understanding of the world just started crumbling, and what's left is this less magical, less perfect, less ideal image of the world that you're living in. This is probably the most common example of a loss of innocence. There's no going back, and each layer gets more and more real. This analogy, I think, can explain most of the events of Made in Abyss, and it kind of mirrors the audience's experience also. We have a loss of innocence when we realize that this isn't some silly little Pokemon adventure show. These characters are constantly getting beat down, constantly witnessing the horrors of the Abyss, and constantly on the verge of death. Honestly, if you've only ever seen season 1 and you liked it, the movie and season 2 are truly what cemented this as a top 10 anime for me. Straight up. Evangelion is the worst show in this tier. The story is simply not up to par. The issues I have with it extend and vary about as much as the sheer amount of plot holes, needless jargon, and ass pulls that the show frequents. Yeah, so Gendo Kari, you've done a bunch of heinous shit. Made yourself the captain of the 13 Court Guard squad of deadbeat dads in anime, and you also tried to literally vaporize all life in existence on planet Earth. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, why do all this? The Human Instrumentality Project has always been an insidious preordained prophecy. As long as the Tree of Life, the 13th Angel, and the poop stains on my diaper all reach singularity, the central dogma has essentially already accomplished its ultimate purpose. Bro, respectfully, you're not gonna get away with killing the entire population by using big words. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I had no hand in any of this. Oh, so you're denying your own genocide? I plead the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, obviously none of this happened in the show, but the fact that I can imagine this being an actual conversation in the show, hell, I don't even need to imagine, because the characters actually talk like this. What happened to Ava Unit 1? It seemed like the electromagnetic hybridization field over the left nipple has left Ava Unit 1 vulnerable to penetration. What? But let me give credit where credit is due, because Evangelion is known for a lot of things. First of all, it's arguably one of the most influential anime to ever anime. Like, it's crazy how widespread this shit actually became at the time compared to others. And secondly, the show had a huge hand in the popularization of mecha anime. But I may be tripping, because why do I not see any similarity between this and this? Well, in Evangelion, I'd actually argue that the mechas are actively the least interesting thing about the show. Of course, it's eye-catching, and of course, that's probably the reason you got into Eva in the first place. But the reason you stayed is surely for another reason. You see, I opened up this section shitting on a number of issues the show has for one extremely deliberate reason. It was to cover up the fact that I'm a pretentious asshole about this show. I think it was a measured, calculated decision to have these characters spouting nonsense. I think it was intentional to have seemingly random religious symbolism thrown around everywhere. And I think the lore is actually pretty cool. You see, it all just depends on perspective. I got it instantly. Hideaki Anno is shouting to us. This is what this show is about. The crushing weight of expectations, the depressing effects of the weight of expectations. And then there's the absurdity around everything that's happening to us. Killing angels that look like devils, characters with intentions that don't make sense. It makes you want to laugh at how ludicrous and absurd the world has become, because nothing makes any sense. Nobody makes sense. Shinji is our protagonist, so I wouldn't say it'd be a reach to say that we experience this story from the perspective of him. So when characters say things that are indecipherable or events happen that are unthinkable, we see the same scenes as Shinji does, and we share in his confusion and powerlessness. People who say that Eva is confusing are missing the point. The pseudo-scientific bullshit, the man-made Avas, the conspiracy of the organization, the human instrumentality, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of it was just made up on the spot. Evangelion is such a human story. It bends to the whims of whatever it felt in the moment, and it just does whatever it wants, because all of this is just a mirage, an illusion, to keep us from the point of it all, the characters. In many ways, every character reflects some sort of deep-seated flaw in another. Shinji directs so much inwards, the pressure of being the one safeguard for humanity. All that terrifying expectation is concentrated inwards. Asuka is precisely the opposite. Her mannerisms and personality and everything about her just screams, "Look at me." Her immense pressure to be perfect is weighed in outwardly achievements, and it quickly begins to eat at her. Rei contrasts with both Shinji and Asuka simultaneously because she feels no expectations, to the point where she doesn't really even have a sense of self and completely neglects to take care of herself. Evangelion started off pretty weird, but then it got weirder, creepier, and even more nonsensical, but that's fine because it was always about the characters. And then this shit happened.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations.
Yeah, so to be completely honest, I only liked one out of the 3 endings Eva got, and that one ending is End of Evangelion. Don't worry, we'll talk about the rebuilds in a minute, but what I want to focus on is one of the most puzzling movies I've ever watched. People love this movie, they love it a lot, and honestly, it confused me a lot. From doubling down on the weird pseudoscientific jargon to accelerating the presence of these sort of cryptic character motivations, and then it also just ends abruptly. Everyone dies, and Shinji has to live with the regret of starting the third impact. This movie had the setup to be absolutely hated because just like in the original, nothing is explained, and the literal ending is this downright strange and unconventional conclusion from a storytelling standpoint. But I think it works. Hideaki Anno makes it work. He was able to connect everything he wanted to say. Nerve HQ being invaded by other humans foreshadows the fact that man's greatest enemy is man. Shinji's perceived greatest enemy isn't the angels, it's others. Other people who won't acknowledge him or help him. But it quite literally takes everyone he's ever loved dying and the entire world crashing down for him to realize that his greatest enemy isn't actually anyone around him. So that only means one thing. It has to be himself. It's the same concept as what the last couple of episodes of the original anime were trying to convey. This time, it's just presented more eloquently. But then hey, we're not done yet. The rebuilds happened, and I absolutely love that they happened. It was so great to see old classic Eva be given a fresh modern coat of paint. Shiro Sagasu got back on site to cook up some of the best movie soundtracks I've ever heard. 1.0 was just mostly a retelling of the first half of the original anime, and while it's great as a standalone production, there's not much to actually talk about since it's virtually the same material. 2.0 is where it gets spicy, and it may very well be my favorite in the entire trilogy. We immediately start seeing changes. The first one I'll immediately point out is Mari, which is actually one of my biggest criticisms of the entire movie series. Out of the 3 teenagers in the main cast of the original, Shinji, Asuka, and Rei, all of them felt equal, and they mattered equally to each other. The narrative dynamic that these 3 had was almost perfect. And then there's Mari. And look, she's a fun character, and I literally thought she was a great concept too. Actually, if we're just talking about this movie, she's great, full stop. But ultimately, she's grossly underutilized and one of the biggest disappointments of the rebuilds, to be honest. So 2.0 ends with Shinji fucking up at an almost incomprehensible scale. 2.0 is a lot like End of Eva, and I think that's why I liked it so much. But this time, we will have a glimpse into what happens post Third Impact. There's a lot to love, but there's also a lot to hate with 3.0. On one hand, I really hate how a lot of the fights play out in this movie. They're on a spaceship now, if you don't know. And a lot of these fights are just these boring spaceship battles. And it felt like in this movie specifically, we've been getting way too much nonsense where the characters will just be yapping about some random overcomplicated science words they just made up. And it's just shit that's going into one ear and going out the other. There's also the fact that this movie is practically a reskinning of 2.0. It plays out pretty much the same that it does in 2.0, but this time he joins the dark side. So surprise, Shinji catastrophically fucks up again. And get this, he starts a 4th impact. Whoa. But I don't hate this movie. It has its place in the Rebuild franchise, and it has some of the sickest imagery in any anime movie I've ever seen. Like, this is what the fourth impact looks like. Honestly, the most metal shit I've seen in my life. And that's why it's been my laptop wallpaper for the better part of 2 years. Also, this movie isn't completely derivative of 2.0, since there's actually a huge difference between Shinji's fuck up in the past compared to his fuck up now. This time, it's completely his fault. So that begs the question, how do you forgive yourself when you've done something so unforgivable? Enter 4.0. Something I considered just a downright beautiful movie, from Rei's entire character arc to one of the best depictions of depression I've ever seen in Shinji. But then, I rewatched 4.0. Twice, actually. And I'm not gonna lie, every single time I rewatched it, I've grown more and more contemptuous of its ending. I think this ending is actually very analogous to the original show's ending, where the characters just talk out their problems inside Shinji's mind. Although this time the main conflict is between Shinji and his father, and they talk out their problems. I like it better than the original, but I also don't like it. I think Evangelion is a great show that is rightfully hated. It's not for everyone. But I think that at the end of the day, there's a message we could all learn from this show. That life is like a wiener. It may be up, it may be down, but it's never hard forever. Guys, I have a Patreon, if you don't know. This was definitely a passion project for me because I love this genre so much. And it's because of the wonderful people you're seeing on screen that I can even think of dedicating 4 months of my life and several hundred hours to stuff like this. Is what I really want to say, but as you can see on screen, these numbers are not numbering. So I guess what I'm trying to say is please pay my tuition. Thank you so much to all of my current Patreon members. I love you guys more than bread and butter. As always, leave a like if you liked it and also consider subscribing. It really helps me out. Also, join the Discord if you want to talk. It's where I'll be uploading the actual tier list. Link in the description. Okay, bye.